Arthur had laughed when he said it, a soft, indulgent sound that felt like a pat on the head. He had been showing his colleague a photo of their new patio, and when Hannah had offered a quiet, accented greeting, Arthur had simply guided the man away, murmuring something about her needing her rest. It wasn't a shout. It was the casual, polite way he brushed her aside, like clearing a stray crumb from a pristine table. He didn't see the silent, tightening grip of her fingers, or the way the heat flared behind her eyes before cooling into a hard, quiet resentment. He only saw a wife who was too slow, too traditional, and too embarrassing for the bright corporate world he was building. When the front door finally clicked shut and the house was empty of guests, she didn't scream or demand an apology. Instead, she walked back to the one space where her invisible labor was still required to keep his prestige spotless. The sub-zero refrigerator in the corner of the kitchen emitted a low, high-frequency hum that only seemed audible after 8 in the evening. It was a dual compressor model, $12,000, installed 3 months ago when the renovations on the Bellevue house were completed. The salesman had promised it was whisper quiet, but Hannah could hear it through her soles whenever she stood near the island. She was currently standing there, a damp blue microfiber cloth in her right hand, wiping down the white quartz countertop. The quartz was called Calicut gold. The designer had insisted the gray and gold veining added instant prestige to the open concept space. "The RSVP is due by noon tomorrow," Arthur said. He didn't look up from his phone. He was sitting at the far end of the island, his elbows resting on the cool stone. He wore his work shirt, a tailored lavender linen that didn't wrinkle, with the top 2 buttons undone. His skin had the healthy, slightly tanned glow of someone who spent his lunch hours in a high-end corporate gym rather than a windowless basement office. "I put myself down as a single attendee," he continued, his thumb flicking rhythmically across the screen. Click, click. "I told them you had a commitment with the house, or with Leo. I figured it saved everyone the awkwardness of the seating chart." Hannah's hand paused. The microfiber cloth left a thin, evaporating film of warm water and dish soap on the quartz. Through the double-paned glass of the kitchen window, the Washington rain was a silent, vertical blur against the blackness of the backyard. "The seating chart," she repeated. Her voice was flat, dry from the central heating that ran constantly to keep the drafty high ceilings at exactly 72 degrees. "Well, yes," Arthur said, his tone perfectly reasonable, almost gentle. He finally set the phone face down on the counter. "It's the executive level, Hannah. These dinners aren't like the ones we used to have in the graduate housing basement. It's mostly managing partners and the regional VP, people who, well, they talk about a very specific set of things. Local real estate taxes, the sailing club in Shilshole Bay, contemporary art galleries in Pioneer Square." He reached out and adjusted the salt cellar, a small, hand-carved block of pink Himalayan salt that Hannah had bought because she thought it looked warm. He moved it 2 inches to the left, aligning it perfectly with the pepper grinder. "I just don't want you to feel out of place," he said, looking at her chin rather than her eyes. "You remember the summer mixer last year. You spent 40 minutes talking to the senior partner's wife about how to grow pickling cucumbers in cold climates. It was sweet, But it's a different crowd now. We have to be mindful of the impression we make, especially now that the director role is open. Hannah looked at his collar. There was a tiny, microscopic fray near the left point where the dry cleaner's tag had been ripped off too quickly. She had bought that shirt for him. She had bought it with the money she earned from the weekend shifts at the bakery on 85th, back when her wrists were constantly swollen from kneading 50-pound batches of sourdough. She calculated the energy it would take to bring up the bakery. She calculated the energy it would take to remind him of the winter of 2015, when they lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a radiator that clanked like a dying animal, and she spent her evenings translating his thesis drafts from his rough immigrant English into something his professors wouldn't reject. The air in her lungs felt heavy, like wet wool. To speak would require drawing in a deep breath, assembling the words, and delivering them against his smooth, polished wall of common sense. She decided against it. "I see," she said. She squeezed the microfiber cloth. A single drop of grayish water fell onto her thumb, cold and soapy. The door from the garage clicked open, and Leo walked in. He was 15 now, tall, with Arthur's sharp jawline and a slouch that seemed designed to make him look shorter. He had his AirPods in, one earbud dangling against his collarbone. He didn't look at Hannah. He walked straight to the refrigerator, opened it, and stood in the cold light, staring at the shelves. "There's chicken in the glass container," Hannah said, her voice dropping into the familiar, soft rhythm she used with her son. "I made the broth with the marrow bones you like." "No thanks," Leo muttered. He pulled out a carton of oat milk, drank straight from the carton, and set it back on the shelf. He didn't close the door all the way. He turned toward Arthur. "Dad, did you sign the waiver for the ski trip? The deadline is Friday." "I did," Arthur said, his face instantly brightening. The dismissive, careful tone he had used with Hannah vanished, replaced by the bright, energetic voice of a mentor. "Send it to the coach this afternoon. I also looked at the gear list. We're going to get you those carbon composite poles. The aluminum ones you have are too heavy for the steep runs at Whistler." "Awesome," Leo said. He finally turned his eyes toward Hannah, but only to point at the counter. "Mom, where's my black hoodie, the one with the zipper?" "It's in the dryer," Hannah said. "It needs another 10 minutes. "I need it now," Leo said, his forehead creasing with mild irritation. "Maddox is picking me up in 5. We're going to the library." "It's damp, Leo. If you wear it damp, it will smell." "It's fine," he said, already moving toward the laundry room off the hallway. "Just don't dry it on high next time. It shrinks the cuffs." The laundry room door swung shut with a soft, magnetic click. Hannah stood alone at the island with Arthur. The silence returned, filled only by the hum of the Sub-Zero. Arthur picked his phone back up. The screen lit up his face with a pale blue glow, highlighting the fine lines around his eyes, the only signs that he was 42 and not 30. "I'm going to go up and finish some slide decks," he said, sliding off the bar stool. He patted his stomach lightly, a habit he had developed since he started the keto diet. "Don't wait up. I'll probably be until midnight." He didn't wait for her response. He walked toward the stairs, his leather house slippers making a soft shuff-shuff sound against the white oak floorboards. Hannah remained standing by the island. She looked down at the Calicotta gold quartz. Near the edge, right where Arthur had been resting his phone, there was a small, dull ring. It was from the bottom of his coffee mug from this morning. The acidity of the light roast espresso he insisted on buying had slightly etched the sealant of the stone. She could get the baking soda. She could mix it into a paste, apply it to the spot, cover it with plastic wrap, and tape down the edges so it would draw out the stain overnight. She had done it 3 times before. Instead, Hannah took the blue microfiber cloth, folded it twice into a neat, perfect square, and laid it over the dull ring, hiding it from view. She turned off the overhead pendant lights. The kitchen plunged into a deep gray twilight, illuminated only by the small green digital clock on the built-in microwave. 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock. It had been flashing since the power flicker 3 days ago. Neither Arthur nor Leo had noticed. Hannah reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. It was an older model, the screen slightly cracked at the bottom corner. She didn't open her email, nor did she check the school portal. She opened a browser window and typed in the name of a small local real estate agency in Zadar. The website was slow to load, its layout clunky and outdated compared to the sleek, high-speed portals she used in Bellevue. A listing appeared, a stone house 300 meters from the Adriatic Sea with a small olive grove that needed pruning. The price was listed in euros. Hannah stared at the image of the dry stone wall in the midday Mediterranean sun until her eyes adjusted to the darkness of her kitchen. The morning light in Bellevue did not wake the house. It merely changed the color of the fog from black to a dull, bruised slate. Hannah was awake at 5:45, before the alarm on Arthur's side of the bed could hum. Her knees made a faint, dry pop as she swung her legs out from under the heavy down comforter. The hardwood floor was cold, a clean polyurethane chill that sank into the soles of her wool socks. In the kitchen, the air smelled of nothing. That was how Arthur liked it. No lingering cooking odors from the night before. No grease, no heavy spices. She had spent 20 minutes before bed wiping down the stove with white vinegar to neutralize the faint scent of the bone broth she had simmered for Leo. She pressed the power button on the Italian espresso machine. It was a dual-boiler chrome beast that occupied 3 feet of counter space. It took exactly 14 minutes to reach the correct pressure. While the orange light blinked, Hannah stood by the sink and began assembling Leo's lunch. She sliced a sourdough baguette, organic, gluten-tested, $6 a loaf, and spread a thin layer of salted butter on both sides. Next came the dry-cured ham she bought from the specialty market downtown. Leo liked the fat trimmed off, so she used a pair of kitchen shears to clip the pale white ribbons away from the pink meat. "Is the water hot?" Arthur's voice came from the archway. He was already fully dressed in his charcoal gray suit, though his tie was missing. His collar was stiff and white, standing up like a small fence around his throat. He was carrying his leather briefcase, the brass buckles polished to a dull gleam. "It needs 4 more minutes," Hannah said. She didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the small mound of trimmed white fat on her cutting board. Arthur checked his watch, a chronograph he had purchased to celebrate his first quarter as a senior manager. "I have a 6:30 sync with the Tokyo team. I'll just grab something at the office drip bar." "The beans are already ground," she said quietly. "It's fine, Hannah, really. Don't worry about it." He walked to the island, setting his briefcase down with a heavy, muffled thud.
He began leafing through the stack of mail she had sorted the previous afternoon. Did the dry cleaner drop off the laundry yesterday afternoon? Yes. Where is the gray silk tie? The one with the small herringbone pattern. Hannah kept her back to him as she wrapped Leo's sandwich in parchment paper. I didn't see it on the rack.
Arthur frowned, his fingers rustling through the paper envelopes. That's strange. I specifically asked for it to be ready by Tuesday. I have the dinner tonight with the regional partners and then the breakfast presentation tomorrow. It's the only tie that matches the charcoal suit properly. They might have missed it, she said. In reality, the tie was sitting in the bottom of the canvas hamper in the laundry room. It had a faint, yellowed grease spot near the knot, a drop of olive oil from a salad Arthur had eaten at his desk last week. Usually, Hannah would have spent 20 minutes dabbling it with cornstarch and dish soap before hand-washing it in cold water. This time, she had simply tossed it into the dark colors bin and covered it with a pair of Leo's mud-stained soccer socks. Arthur sighed, a sound that was more of an administrative exhalation than an expression of anger. Could you call them today? Ask for Mrs. Cho. She usually handles my orders. Tell her it's urgent. I have the car in the shop at 11, Hannah said. Well, after that then, or before. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. He didn't look up to see if she agreed. He picked up his briefcase, his eyes already back on his phone as a notification chimed. Oh, and the lawn service is coming tomorrow. Make sure they don't leave the gate unlatched again. The neighbor's retriever got into the hydrangeas last time, and Mrs. Gable was quite vocal about it. I'll watch them, Hannah said. Leo stumbled into the kitchen then, his hair mashed flat on one side of his head. He wore his school uniform, the navy trousers and polo shirt with the private academy's crest. He looked pale, his eyes small and red-rimmed from staying up until 2 playing video games. My hoodie still smells like damp, he complained, dropping his backpack onto the floor with a loud clatter. Did you put it in the dryer at all, Mom? Hannah handed him the wrapped sandwich. I did. The cuffs were thick. They take longer. It's practically wet, he grumbled, throwing the sandwich into his bag without looking at it. Maddox's mom always has his stuff smelling like those lavender dryer sheets. Our clothes just smell like nothing, or vinegar. Arthur chuckled, a warm, indulgent sound, as he patted Leo on the shoulder. Your mother prefers the traditional way, Leo. No artificial scents. It's a European thing. Come on, let's get in the car. If we leave now, we beat the Mercer Island bottleneck. Can we stop at Starbucks? Leo asked, his voice instantly shifting into a plea as he followed his father toward the garage. I need a matcha. If you get your shoes on in 30 seconds, yes. Arthur's voice drifted back as the heavy fire door to the garage swung open. The door closed. The automatic lock clicked into place with a sharp hydraulic hiss. A moment later, the low rumble of the SUV's engine vibrated through the kitchen floor, followed by the slow, grinding whine of the garage door opening, then closing. The house was empty. Hannah stood by the island. The orange light on the espresso machine had stopped blinking. It was now a solid, steady amber. The machine was ready. She didn't make espresso. She walked down the narrow, carpeted hallway to the laundry room. It was a small space, crowded with a front-loading washer and dryer that sat on pedestals. On the wall above them was a white wire shelf containing laundry detergent, stain removers, and a metal box where she kept the household documents she had accumulated over the last 12 years. Hannah took the box down and set it on top of the dryer. She opened the lid. Inside were folders labeled with blue marker, tax returns, 2018 to 2022, immunization records, mortgage documents, and Zadar Orchard. She pulled out the Zadar Orchard folder. Inside was a copy of her late father's will, translated from Croatian into English by a certified court translator in Seattle 10 years ago. It stated that the 3-acre parcel of land near the village of Bibinya, just south of Zadar, was left solely to Hannah Kos. Beneath the translation was the bank wire confirmation from 2021, when she had finally agreed to sell the land to a local hotel developer. The amount was 380,000 euros. At the time, Arthur had wanted to use the funds to put down the 60% down payment on this Bellevue home to avoid paying private mortgage insurance. He had explained, with several Excel spreadsheets, how it was the most fiscally responsible move for their family's future. He had promised her that her name would be on the deed as an equal partner, which it was. Hannah touched the dry paper of the wire transfer. Her name was Hannah Kos Vukovic on the deed. But in the original bank records from Croatia, the funds had originated from her personal, non-marital inheritance account. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and opened her contacts. She scrolled past Arthur, past Leo's pediatrician, past Bellevue Landscaping, until she reached a name she hadn't called in 7 years. Dario, legal, split. She tapped the name, then paused. In Croatia, it was currently mid-afternoon. The sun would be hitting the red tile roofs of the old town, and the smell of roasted fish and salt water would be drifting through the open windows of the offices near the harbor. She pressed the call button. The phone rang 4 times before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Dobar dan, legal office, Dario. Hearing her native language spoken with the flat, rolling vowels of the Dalmatian coast felt like a physical weight dropping into Hannah's stomach. She took a breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the dryer. Dario? It's Hannah. Hannah Kos. There was a brief pause, the sound of papers rustling on the other end of the line, and then a low chuckle. Hannah? My God! It has been, 6 years? 7? How is Seattle? Is it still raining? It's raining today, she said. She kept her voice low, almost a whisper, though the house was completely empty. Dario, I need to ask you some questions about the orchard sale from 2021, the 380,000 euros. Ah, the Babinja land, Dario said. His tone shifted, becoming professional, the warmth cooling into the precise cadence of a lawyer. Yes, I remember. We handled the tax clearance from this side. Is there a problem with the IRS? I thought we filed all the foreign asset declarations correctly. No, there is no problem with the tax, Hannah said. She leaned her shoulder against the cool metal of the dryer, looking down at her socks. I need to know about the paper trail. The money went from the Splitska Banka directly to the escrow company in Washington for the house purchase. It never touched our joint checking account. Is that record still in your archive? Of course, Dario said. We keep all transaction logs for 10 years. But why do you ask? Are you refinancing? Hannah stared at the small metal box on the dryer. If a marriage ends here, in this state, they divide what we bought together. But my father's land was mine before the marriage. The line went quiet for a moment. Through the static, Hannah could hear the faint, distant horn of a ferry on the Adriatic, a sound she hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Hannah, Dario said, his voice dropping an octave, softer now. Are you all right? I am fine, she said. I am just cleaning my files. I want to make sure I have the correct papers. Dario cleared his throat. Under Washington law, and I am not a U.S. lawyer, Hannah, you must consult someone there. But generally, if the funds are traceable as separate property and were never commingled into a joint account, they retain their separate character. Because we wired the money directly to the title company for the down payment, the trail is very clean. You used 380,000 euros of your own money to buy that house. If you sell it, or if you separate, that portion should return to you before the rest is divided. And the value of the house now? Whatever the appreciation is, that is divided, Dario said. But your principal, the orchard, is yours, assuming you have the wire receipt and my certification. Can you email them to me? Hannah asked. To a new address. I will write it down for you. Yes, Dario said. He sounded cautious, his curiosity kept in check by professional discretion. I will send them today. Hannah, if you need anything else, a place to stay or someone to talk to, my sister still has the apartment in the old town. It's empty during the off-season. Thank you, Dario. Just the papers for now. She hung up before he could say anything else. Her palm was sweating against the glass of the phone. She deleted the call from her history, deleted his contact, and wrote the new email address she had created last night on a small scrap of paper, which she tucked into the toe of her winter boots in the closet. At 10:45, Hannah sat in her 2017 Volvo XC90. The interior of the car smelled of stale Cheerios from when Leo was younger, mixed with the faint, sharp scent of wet dog from the neighbor's golden retriever that she sometimes drove to the vet as a favor. The dashboard indicator glowed yellow. Brake service required. She drove down the hill toward the auto shop in Bellevue. The rain had slowed to a heavy mist that clung to the dark green pine trees lining the boulevard. Huge million-dollar homes sat behind security gates, their wide, empty driveways glistening in the damp light. The service center was clean, looking more like a dental clinic than a garage. The floors were gray epoxy, polished to a high shine, and the waiting room offered complimentary sparkling water and small glass jars of organic almonds. A young man in a blue polo shirt with Marcus embroidered on the chest looked at his computer screen as Hannah walked up. Mrs. Vukovich, he said, using Arthur's legal last name. We have you down for the brake inspection and the 30,000-mile service. Yes, she said. Great. It should take about 2 hours. We'll do a full diagnostic and let you know what we find. Hannah sat in one of the low leather chairs in the corner. She didn't look at her phone. She watched the rain hit the skylight above. 2 hours of silence. No one asking where their clothes were. No one telling her what to say or how to behave. After 90 minutes, Marcus walked back into the waiting area, holding an iPad. He had a look of polite concern. "So, Mrs. Vukovich, we finished the diagnostic," he said, showing her the screen. "The rear brake pads are down to 2 millimeters. We definitely need to replace those, and the rotors are quite warped. With the rain we get here, you really don't want to risk the stopping distance. We also found a small leak in the oil pan gasket." Hannah looked at the numbers. The total at the bottom of the screen was $2,480. "Is the car safe to drive back to the house?" she asked. Marcus blinked. "Well, yes, for today, but I wouldn't recommend driving it like this for more than a week, especially on the highway." Hannah made an internal calculation. Arthur's credit card was saved on the shop's computer. It was the card that paid for everything: the groceries, the home insurance, the soccer camps. If she approved the repair, the charge would appear on his phone instantly. He would call her, ask why it was so expensive, and ask if she had shopped around for a better price. He would use his management voice, the one that made her feel like a junior employee who had made a minor accounting error. "Just do the rear pads today," Hannah said. "Leave the rotors and the gasket." Marcus frowned slightly. "The new pads won't wear evenly if we don't turn or replace the rotors, ma'am. You'll get a squeak." "The squeak is fine," Hannah said. "Just the pads." "All right," Marcus said, his tone dropping slightly, the professional friendliness replaced by a cooler, more clinical efficiency. "I'll update the work order. It will be $640. "And Marcus," Hannah said before he could turn away, "could you print out the estimated trade-in value for this car, the Blue Book value?" He stopped, his stylus hovering over the iPad. "The trade-in? Are you looking to upgrade to a newer model? We have a great partnership with the Lexus dealership next door." "Just the paper," Hannah said, her voice quiet but firm, "for our insurance." Marcus looked at her for a second, then nodded. "Sure, I can run that for you. It'll take 5 minutes." When the paper was handed to her 20 minutes later, she didn't look at it until she was back in the driver's seat. The trade-in value for the Volvo, even with the warped rotors, was $18,500. The title of the car was in her name alone. They had bought it during her 3rd year of working at the bakery, before Arthur's salary had tripled, back when he didn't care whose name went on the registration. She folded the paper into a small square and slid it into her glove compartment, right behind the registration. The engine started with a soft, clean purr. The yellow warning light on the dashboard was gone, but as she pulled out of the parking lot onto the wet asphalt, she could hear it, a tiny metallic squeak from the rear wheels. It was a small, persistent sound, like a clock ticking in an empty room. The silence of the house after 3 in the afternoon had a peculiar weight. In the winter, the Bellevue sky turned a bruised, uniform violet by 4, and the automated landscape lights along the driveway clicked on with a dull, synchronized snap from the electrical box in the garage. Hannah stood in the center of the master bedroom's walk-in closet. The space was carpeted in a thick, cream-colored wool that muffled her footsteps. It smelled of cedar blocks and the dry chemical scent of Arthur's starch. His side of the closet was a study in corporate architecture. 32 custom cherrywood hangers held his shirts, arranged by shade from crisp white to deep navy. Below them sat 12 pairs of Italian leather Oxfords, each fitted with an adjustable cedar shoe tree to maintain its shape. He had a glass-topped island in the center just for his watches, cufflinks, and the leather-bound trays where he kept his tie clips. Hannah's side of the closet was half the size. Her clothes were mostly gray, beige, and navy. Neutral, unstructured knits she had bought at Nordstrom because Arthur had suggested they made her look more established when they ran into his colleagues at the local grocery store. Classic, he had called it, understated. At the very back of her top shelf, behind a stack of vacuum-sealed summer linen, sat a small, lumpy bundle. Hannah reached up, her fingers grazing the rough plastic of the vacuum bag, and pulled it down. She unzipped the seal. The air that escaped smelled of dried lavender, cedar, and something sharp and coarse, the sheep's wool of her grandmother's kitchen in Bibinja. She pulled out the sweater. It was heavy, knitted from raw, unbleached wool that her grandmother had dyed herself using boiled walnut shells. It was a dark, uneven brown, rough to the touch, and the collar was slightly stretched from where Hannah had hung it on a cheap wire hanger during their first year in America. Arthur had tried to throw it away 3 years ago during their move to Bellevue. "It's unraveling at the hem, Hannah," he had said, holding it between 2 fingers as if it were a wet rag. "And it smells like an old cellar. We have a guest closet now. We don't need to keep things we don't wear." She had taken it back from him without a word and tucked it away. Now she held the rough wool against her cheek. The fibers were stiff, scratching her skin, but beneath the cedar she could still smell the faint, ghostly trace of salt and olive wood smoke. It was the only object in this 5,000-square-foot house that had not been purchased with Arthur's corporate bonuses. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. The screen showed a text from Arthur. "Heading to the Metropolitan Grill now with the team. VP bought the first round. Don't forget about the lawn gate tomorrow morning. They arrive at 8 a.m. Thanks." Hannah looked at the message. In the past, she would have replied instantly, "Have a good time. I'll make sure the gate is unlocked." She would have added a small smiley face or a heart to show she wasn't angry about being left behind. She would have spent the evening keeping Leo quiet so Arthur could sleep when he got home, or she would have left a small glass of water and 2 aspirin on his nightstand in case he drank too much. She slid the phone back into her pocket. She did not reply. She carried the brown sweater downstairs, laid it over the back of the small wooden chair in the laundry room, and sat down at the built-in desk. The screen of her laptop reflected in the glass of the window behind her. She logged into the primary portal for their joint bank accounts. Arthur had set up the security parameters years ago, using his email as the primary recovery address. He liked to keep things centralized. "It's just easier for tax purposes, sweetie," he had told her when they bought the house. "You do the day-to-day stuff, and I'll handle the high-level investments." Hannah clicked on the tab labeled Home Equity Line of Credit. The limit was $200,000. It had been approved 2 years ago, a safety net they had never touched. Because the house was in both their names, the HELOC was a joint asset. Hannah did not click the Draw Funds button. She knew that doing so would trigger an automated text alert to Arthur's phone within 3 seconds. Instead, she clicked on Profile Settings. She navigated to Alert Preferences. She scrolled down through the list of notifications. Large transaction alerts, low balance alerts, HELOC draw alerts. All of them were checked, with Arthur's mobile number and corporate email address listed as the destination. Hannah systematically unchecked the box for SMS alerts. Then she changed the primary notification email from Arthur's corporate address to her newly created private email account. She typed in the password, the street name of her childhood home in Zadar, followed by her grandmother's birth year. The system paused, a small gray circle spinning on the screen. To confirm these changes, a one-time passcode has been sent to the primary mobile number ending in 4829, Arthur's number. Hannah looked at the clock on her microwave. It was 4:45. Arthur would be at the Metropolitan Grill, likely on his second drink, surrounded by the loud clinking glass and laughter of the partners. His phone would be on the table, face up, next to his cocktail. She clicked Resend Code. Then she picked up her own phone and dialed Arthur's number. He answered on the second ring. The background noise was a roar of male voices, laughter, and the distinctive clatter of expensive steakhouse cutlery. "Hannah? Everything okay?" He sounded slightly breathless, his voice pitched high to carry over the din. "I'm in the middle of a toast." "Arthur," she said, her voice remarkably calm, her tone slightly apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you. I am trying to log into the school portal to pay for Leo's ski field trip, but it is asking for a verification code. It says it sent it to your phone. Can you read it to me?" "Oh, right," Arthur said. She heard him pull the phone away from his ear. Let me check my messages. Yeah, here it is. 58291. Did you get that? 58291, Hannah repeated, her fingers already typing the numbers into the bank security prompt on her laptop. The screen flashed green. Changes saved successfully. "Yes," Hannah said. "Thank you. Go back to your dinner." "Great. See you tonight," he said, and the line went dead. Hannah sat in the quiet laundry room, the laptop screen casting a cool blue light over her hands. The transition was complete. The bank would no longer send text messages to his phone for any draws or transfers. The emails would go to her secret account. She closed the laptop, stood up, and went to the kitchen to wait for Leo. By 9:30, the light rain had turned into a thick, low-lying mist that clung to the asphalt of the cul-de-sac. Upstairs, the muffled bass from Leo's room had finally stopped, replaced by the silence of a teenager asleep with his phone still glowing against his pillow. Hannah sat in the dark living room. She hadn't turned on the lamps. The only illumination came from the street lamp at the corner of their property. Its light filtered through the bare branches of the Japanese maple, casting long, skeletal shadows across the gray linen sofa. A pair of bright, blue-white LED headlights cut through the glass of the front bay windows, sweeping across the ceiling before disappearing into the garage. It was the quiet electric purr of Arthur's Audi. Hannah did not get up to turn on the foyer light. She did not open the front door to greet him. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting flat on her knees. She heard the heavy thud of the garage door closing, followed by the electronic beep of the car's lock. Then came the sound of his key fumbling against the deadbolt. Without the porch light on, the brass keyhole was difficult to find in the dark. "Hannah?" Arthur's voice was slightly louder than usual, carrying the loose, elevated pitch of someone who had spent 4 hours drinking $80 scotch on a company credit card. He stepped into the foyer, his leather shoes clicking against the oak floorboards. Why is it pitch black in here? He reached out and slapped the bank of light switches on the wall. The overhead recessed lights in the kitchen and living room hummed to life with a sudden, painful glare. Hannah blinked, but did not shield her eyes. Arthur stood in the archway. His tie was tucked into his jacket pocket, and his collar was open, his neck slightly red. He smelled of cold rain, expensive peat smoke, and the heavy garlic butter of the steakhouse. "The porch light is dead," he said, shaking his head as he slipped his heavy wool overcoat off his shoulders. "I nearly tripped over Leo's skateboard on the walk. We need to get that bulb replaced, Hannah. It's a liability. If one of the partners came by and saw the place looking abandoned..." He didn't finish the sentence. He walked over to the kitchen island and draped his charcoal overcoat over the back of the white leather bar stool. Usually, the moment she heard his car in the driveway, Hannah would be at the door. She would take his coat, shake off the Washington mist, and hang it on a cedar hanger in the mudroom. She would have already set out his slippers and a tall glass of filtered water with a slice of organic lemon to help clear his head before bed. Tonight, the overcoat stayed on the bar stool, the wet wool slowly dampening the expensive white leather. Hannah did not move. "I'll look at it tomorrow," she said. "Yeah, do that." Arthur sat on the adjacent stool, leaning his elbows on the counter. He looked flushed, his eyes bright with the manic energy of a successful corporate performance. "It was a good night, Hannah, a really good night. Ted, the senior partner from the San Francisco office, he took me aside before they ordered the mains. He told me the board is looking very closely at my region for the Q3 reorganization." He paused, waiting for her to ask what that meant. When she remained silent, he pushed forward, his voice rising with excitement. "It's the managing director role, Hannah. It's a 40% bump in the base salary plus equity. He actually asked about you. He remembered you from the summer mixer last year." Hannah looked at the gray veins in the quartz beneath his elbows. What did he remember? "Well," Arthur said, laughing slightly, a dry, dismissive sound. "He said you were very quiet. But I told him you're just traditional. I said you're the backbone of the house. I told him you love working in the garden, keeping things in order. I think it played well. He's very big on family values for the executive team. He thinks it keeps people stable." "Stable," she repeated. "Exactly. It's all about the narrative, sweetie. He actually suggested we host the Q3 strategy lunch here, at the house. Just a small catered thing for the partners and their spouses, maybe 20, 25 people." He looked around the pristine white and gray kitchen with a sense of deep personal ownership. "We'll have to get the cedar deck stained before then, and maybe hire a professional service to do the flower beds. We can't have those wild dandelions popping up." He looked toward the sink, then back to Hannah, his brow furrowed with a tiny, imperceptible flicker of annoyance. "Is there any water?" "The tap works," she said quietly. Arthur blinked. He looked at her, then at the empty counter where his lemon water usually sat. The silence stretched between them, long and thin, like a wire drawn too tight. "Right," he said, his voice dropping into a flatter, colder register. "Okay." He stood up, his movements slightly less graceful now.
He walked to the cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a glass. He had to search for 3 seconds to find the correct ones, the thin crystal tumblers she usually kept on the top shelf. He filled it from the refrigerator door, the ice dispenser clattering loudly in the quiet house.
He drank the entire glass in 3 long gulps. When he was finished, he set the empty tumbler down on the quartz counter right next to his keys. He didn't put it in the dishwasher. He didn't wipe the small ring of water it left behind. "I'm going up," he said, not looking at her as he walked toward the stairs. "Don't forget about the lawn guys tomorrow, 8 a.m., and make sure they don't block the driveway. I have to leave early for the regional breakfast." "I won't forget," she said. His footsteps retreated up the stairs, followed by the soft, distant click of the master bedroom door. Hannah sat alone in the bright, clinical light of the kitchen. She looked at his overcoat still draped over the white leather bar stool. A small, dark circle of dampness was spreading where the shoulder of the coat pressed against the leather. In 12 hours, if left there, the wool would shrink slightly, and the leather would warp from the moisture. She did not touch it. She walked over to the counter, picked up his heavy brass key ring, and slipped it into her apron pocket. Then she walked to the front door. She reached out and turned the dial of the porch light switch. She had turned it off 3 hours ago, not because the bulb was dead, but because she wanted to see how long he would stumble in the dark before he realized she had stopped lighting his path. She switched it back off. The front porch plunged into blackness once more. The smell of damp wool and ruined leather hung in the kitchen like a physical presence. Hannah sat at the small breakfast nook by the window, her hands cupped around a mug of simple black tea. No coffee was brewing. The expensive chrome espresso machine sat cold, its polished metal surface reflecting the gray morning light. On her plate was a single piece of dry toast. Usually by 7:15, the kitchen would smell of toasted sourdough, poached eggs, and fresh squeezed orange juice. A small stack of Leo's vitamins would be lined up next to his water glass, and Arthur's leather binder would be wiped clean and set by his briefcase. Today, the counter was empty, except for Arthur's empty tumbler from the night before, still sitting in its small, dried ring of water. At 7:20, Arthur came down the stairs. He was moving quickly, his leather shoes clicking with a sharp, hurried rhythm. He was wearing a fresh white shirt, but his eyes were bloodshot, and he had a small nick on his jaw from his razor. He walked straight to the bar stool to grab his overcoat. He stopped. His hand hovered over the fabric. The shoulder of the coat was dry now, but the thick wool had stiffened into a rough, unnatural shape. Below it, on the white leather of the bar stool, a dark, dull circle had formed where the water had soaked through the finish. "Hannah," he said, his voice tight. He didn't look at her. He stared at the circle on the leather. "Why was my coat left here all night?" Hannah took a slow sip of her tea. "You said it was wet." "Well, yes, it was wet, but that doesn't mean you leave it to ruin a $4,000 custom bar stool," he said, his tone rising with a sharp, controlled irritation. He picked up the coat. It felt stiff in his hands, the shoulder misshapen. "Now it's wrinkled and the leather is stained. Why didn't you put it on a hanger?" "I didn't want to disturb it," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the soft, apologetic tone he was used to. She didn't look up from her tea. "You said you didn't want me to touch your things when they are damp." Arthur opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer, wall-like indifference of her response seemed to stall him. He frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at her. "Where are my keys?" he asked, changing the subject quickly. He ran a hand over the quartz counter where he always dropped them. "I left them right here." "In the key cabinet," she said. "Why would you put them there?" he grumbled, walking toward the small decorative box by the garage door. "I've told you a dozen times, Hannah, I like them on the counter. It's an extra step when I'm trying to get out the door." He ripped the cabinet door open, grabbed his keys with a loud metallic clink, and didn't close the cabinet. He checked his watch. "I'm already 10 minutes behind. I don't have time for this." He walked into the garage, slamming the door behind him. 3 minutes later, at exactly 7:50, the heavy rumble of a diesel engine filled the cul-de-sac. Hannah looked out the window. A massive black Ford F350 with a yellow commercial trailer had pulled up to the curb. It was the landscaping crew. The trailer, loaded with heavy commercial lawnmowers and leaf blowers, stopped directly behind their driveway, completely blocking the exit. In the garage, the Audi's engine started. The garage door began its slow, screeching ascent. Arthur's car rolled backward, then stopped abruptly 3 feet from the end of the driveway. A loud, long blast of the Audi's horn shattered the quiet morning. It echoed off the wet cedar siding of the neighboring houses. Hannah did not move. She watched through the window as Arthur opened his car door and stepped out onto the wet asphalt. He was not wearing his stiffened overcoat. He stood in his thin white shirt, his chest heaving as he walked toward the landscaping truck. Hector, the foreman of the crew, was just stepping out of the passenger side, holding a clipboard. Arthur began waving his arms, his face flushed red. Even through the double-paned glass, Hannah could hear the sharp, dominant register of his voice. "You're blocking my driveway," Arthur shouted. "I have a regional breakfast in 20 minutes. Move your truck, now!" Hector looked confused, his hand holding the clipboard defensively against his chest. His English was functional but slow, and Arthur's rapid-fire corporate aggression was clearly overwhelming him. He started to apologize, pointing toward the curb, but Arthur cut him off, stepping closer. "I don't care about your schedule, Hector. Move the truck. I pay $400 a month for this service, and I expect you to have enough sense not to trap me in my own home." Hannah stood up. She set her empty tea mug in the sink. She did not rush. She walked to the mudroom, slid her feet into her simple garden clogs, and stepped out onto the front porch. The cold morning air was damp, smelling of cut grass and diesel exhaust. "Hector," she called out. Both men turned. Arthur's face was twisted in a scowl, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Hector's expression instantly changed from defensive to relieved. Hannah walked down the concrete steps. The wet grass brushed against the hem of her gray trousers, but she kept her pace steady and slow. She did not look at Arthur. "Dobar dan, Hector," she said, offering a small, quiet smile. "Mrs. Vukovich," Hector said, taking a step toward her, away from Arthur. "Good morning. I am sorry. We just parked to unload the mowers." "It's fine," Hannah said. She spoke softly, her accent warm and familiar. "Arthur has a very important meeting this morning. Could you back the trailer up just 2 meters, just enough for his car to pass? Then you can park by the mailboxes." Yes, of course, Mrs. Vukovich," Hector said immediately.
He turned and shouted a quick command in Spanish to his brother in the driver's seat. The truck's engine roared, the reverse lights clicked on, and the massive trailer began to swing slowly out of the way, clearing the mouth of the driveway. Arthur stood on the wet asphalt, his arms crossed over his chest. His white shirt was beginning to stick to his shoulders from the mist. He looked at Hannah, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment.
"You should have had this cleared before 8, Hannah," he muttered, not waiting for her to reply as he walked back to his car. "I told you they were coming." He got into the Audi, slammed the door, and reversed aggressively out of the driveway the second the trailer cleared. The tires spun slightly on the wet leaves, leaving 2 dark tracks on the clean concrete before he sped down the street. Hannah remained on the curb. Hector walked over to her, his clipboard under his arm. He looked down the street where the Audi had disappeared, then back to Hannah. "He is very busy today, yes?" Hector asked quietly. "Yes," Hannah said, "very busy." Hector looked toward the porch, his eyes searching the small table next to the door. No coffee today, Mrs. Vukovich. And the sweetbread?" For 3 years, every Wednesday morning, Hannah had left a large thermos of hot drip coffee and a plate of fresh walnut roll on the porch for the crew. It was a small gesture, one she had learned from her mother in Bibinia, where you never let a working man stand in your yard without offering him something warm. Hannah looked at Hector. Her face was calm, her expression entirely neutral. "No," she said. "No coffee today, Hector." Hector blinked, looking slightly disappointed, but he nodded quickly. "Okay, no problem. We start the backyard first." Hannah turned and walked back toward the house. Behind her, the first roar of the lawnmowers started, a loud, grating whine that would fill the neighborhood for the next 2 hours. She stepped inside and closed the door, locking it behind her. The silence of the house returned, but it felt different now. It felt like a space where the warmth had finally been turned off. The trifold cardboard display sat on the dark walnut dining table, propped slightly against a silver candlestick. It was Leo's chemistry project on synthetic polymers. On the bottom left corner of the white poster board, there was a tiny, faint smudge of butter from the sourdough baguette he had eaten for breakfast. Hannah stood in the dining room, looking at it. The house was completely quiet now that the lawnmowers had moved to the next property down the hill. Her phone buzzes in her hand. It was a sharp, aggressive vibration that made her fingers twitch. Leo. "Mom, left my chem board on the table. Bring it to school, now. Classes at 1:15. Hannah looked at the green digital clock on the microwave in the kitchen. It was 11:40. If she left now, she would have to drive 25 minutes through the midday traffic on I-405, find a parking spot in the crowded visitor lot of the private academy, wait at the security desk for the receptionist to verify her ID, and then walk the project down to the science wing. Leo would likely grab it from her with a grunt, complain that she hadn't brought his gym bag too, and walk away without looking back. She calculated the fuel, the time, and the emotional energy. Hannah, "I cannot bring it today, Leo." The response was almost instantaneous. The typing bubbles on the screen bounced frantically before his text appeared. "Leo, what do you mean? You're at home. Just put it in the car and drive here. It's literally my final grade." Hannah stared at the words. "You're at home." To Leo, her presence in the house was a permanent state of readiness, like a pilot light on a stove. She existed to keep the environment warm and functional for his arrival. She typed her reply with a steady, unhurried thumb. "Hannah, I have an appointment. I am leaving the house now." "Leo, Cancel it. Mom, seriously, I'm going to get a C if I don't have this. Just come." She did not reply. She pressed the side button on her phone, turning the screen black, and laid it face down on the dining table, right next to the trifold display. The master bedroom closet was dark when Hannah opened the door, but she didn't turn on the overhead lights. She walked to the far corner, behind the long protective garment bags holding Arthur's winter cashmere coats. Behind the third bag, set into the wall between two studs, was the digital safe. It was a compact, heavy steel box they had installed when they first moved to Bellevue. Arthur had set the master code himself. It was their wedding anniversary, October 14th. He had joked at the time that it was the only way he would ever remember the date. Hannah touched the cold rubber buttons. 1, 0, 1, 4. A soft electronic click echoed in the closet, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, the safe smelled of velvet lining and dry paper. On the top shelf sat 3 heavy velvet boxes containing her mother's jewelry. Traditional Croatian filigree earrings made of 24-karat gold, and a thick, heavy necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. They were delicate, intricate pieces, completely different from the modern, clean-lined diamond studs Arthur had bought her for their 10th anniversary, so she would match the other wives at the corporate holiday dinners. Hannah took her mother's velvet boxes and slid them into her canvas tote bag. On the middle shelf sat a thick envelope bound with a heavy rubber band. Inside were 100 crisp $100 bills. This was the emergency cash Arthur insisted on keeping in the house. "You never know when the banking systems might have a glitch," he had said after a minor cyber attack made local headlines 2 years ago. Hannah pulled the rubber band off. She counted the bills. Her fingertips grew slightly gray from the ink on the fresh paper. $10,000. She did not take all of it. Taking all of it would create an immediate emergency if Arthur opened the safe to check, which he did on the first of every month when he updated his personal net worth spreadsheet. She took $5,000. She folded the 50 bills neatly and slipped them into the inner zipper pocket of her tote bag. She replaced the remaining $5,000, wrapped the rubber band back around the envelope, and set it back on the shelf, shifting it slightly so the envelope still looked thick. Beside the cash sat 2 of Arthur's older luxury watches, a stainless steel Omega and a classic Breitling he had stopped wearing once he upgraded to the titanium smartwatch that tracked his sleep and heart rate. She looked at them for a long moment. They were worth at least $8,000 together on the secondary market. She left them. Taking them would be theft, and she wanted everything she did to remain within the boundaries of legal separation. She did not want Arthur's lawyers to have any leverage when the time came. She only took what she could justify as joint household cash and what was indisputably her own family's inheritance. She closed the safe door, pressed it shut until the lock clicked, and scrambled the digital dial. At 12:45, Hannah sat in the lobby of the bank branch in downtown Bellevue. The space was quiet, smelling of expensive leather and the clean ozone scent of a high-end air filtration system. Huge glass windows looked out onto the gray, wet streets, where business professionals in dark coats hurried between office towers. An advisor in a tailored gray dress walked out of a glass-walled office holding a folder. "Mrs. Vukovic?" she asked, her voice carrying the smooth, rehearsed warmth of a personal banker. I'm Sarah. We have you down for a wire transfer consultation. Yes, Hannah said. She stood up, her canvas tote bag heavy against her hip. They walked into the private office. Sarah closed the heavy glass door, muffling the faint sounds of the lobby completely. She sat behind her mahogany desk and opened Hannah's file on her screen. I see here you have a separate personal savings account with us, Sarah said, her fingers clicking on the keyboard. The balance is 380,000 euros. Oh, sorry. It was converted to US dollars. $392,000. Yes, Hannah said. I want to wire it. Of course, Sarah said, looking up with a polite smile. Are we transferring it to a joint account, or perhaps toward a down payment? We can draft a cashier's check if it's a local title company. No, Hannah said. Her voice was quiet, but there was no hesitation in her tone. I want to wire it to an account in Croatia, a personal account in my name. Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes drifted to the screen, then back to Hannah. A foreign wire of that size. We will need to verify the receiving institution and complete some international compliance forms. Since the funds originated from a foreign sale, the trail is clear, but because of the amount, it might take 48 to 72 hours to clear. Is the receiving account already active? Yes, Hannah said. She reached into her bag and pulled out the document Dario had emailed her that morning. It was her old account at the Splitska Banka, which she had kept open with a small balance of 50 euros for the last 10 years. Here are the IBAN and SWIFT codes. Sarah took the paper, her eyes scanning the Croatian bank details. And you want to transfer the entire balance, Mrs. Vukovic? Yes, Hannah said, every dollar. The garage door closed with its usual mechanical sigh, sealing the damp gray afternoon outside. Hannah stepped out of the Volvo. The air in the garage was thick with the scent of wet rubber and the sharp, hot, metallic tang of the new rear brake pads. She stood by the car door for a moment, her fingers curled around the strap of her canvas tote bag, which felt heavier now with her mother's jewelry and $5,000 in cash secured inside. When she entered the house through the mudroom, she found Leo sitting at the kitchen island. The trifold chemistry board was still on the dining table in the adjacent room, exactly where it had been left. He hadn't moved it. He had left it there as a physical monument to her failure. Leo did not look up when the door opened. He was staring at his phone, his thumb flicking aggressively across the screen, his shoulder blades tense beneath his Navy school polo. I got a 0, he said. His voice was flat, but there was a sharp, trembling edge of teenage fury running through it. Mr. Vance said I can turn the project in tomorrow for a maximum of a C-, but the draft is a 0. It dropped my average by 4%. Hannah hung her raincoat on the peg in the mudroom. She didn't rush. She took her time smoothing the shoulders of the coat, ensuring it hung straight. That is unfortunate, Leo, she said. Unfortunate? He finally looked up, his eyes wide and incredulous. That's all you have to say? I literally texted you 3 hours before class. You were right here. All you had to do was put it in the back of the car and drive 20 minutes. Hannah walked to the sink. She turned on the tap, letting the water run cold over her fingers before she pumped a small dollop of unscented soap into her palms. She washed her hands slowly, focusing on the spaces between her knuckles, which were dry and white from the cold Bellevue air. "I told you I was busy," she said, her back to him. "Doing what?" Leo's voice cracked slightly, his frustration bubbling over. "You don't even work, Mom. You're always just here. You garden, or you clean, or you go to the grocery store. You couldn't take 20 minutes to save my grade?" The words, "you don't even work," hung in the kitchen, cold and sharp. Hannah did not turn around. She rinsed the soap from her hands, watched the white bubbles disappear down the stainless steel drain, and dried her skin with a fresh linen towel. She remembered the first 3 years in this country. She remembered the bakery shifts that started at 4 in the morning, the heavy flour sacks that left her shoulders bruised, and the way her fingernails were permanently stained with yeast. She remembered the 5 hours she spent every evening tutoring Leo in English when he was in kindergarten, translating his worksheets word by word because the school district didn't have an ESL program for their neighborhood. She calculated the energy it would take to explain this to a 15-year-old who had spent his entire life in a house with central heating and heated bathroom tiles. She decided it was not worth the breath. "I had an appointment at the bank," she said. "A bank appointment?" Leo scoffed, rolling his eyes as he slumped back against his stool. "For what? Dad handles all the money. You don't even have a job." "Your father handles some things," Hannah said quietly. "I handle others." She walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a small wire basket of small, dirty yellow potatoes and a head of white cabbage and set them on the island. She fetched a cutting board and a small paring knife. Scrape, scrape. The thin, dirty skins of the potatoes began to curl away under her blade, falling into a neat little pile on the quartz counter. "So what's for dinner?" Leo asked, his tone shifting from angry to petulant. "Maddox's mom took him to get sushi after school because of the project stress. Can we order from that place in Bellevue Square?" "There is cabbage and potato soup tonight," Hannah said, not looking up from her peeling. "It will be ready in an hour." "Cabbage soup?" Leo made a face, his nose wrinkling in disgust. "I'm not eating that. It smells like a wet dog when you cook it. Can I just use your card for Uber Eats?" "No," Hannah said. Leo blinked, his phone halfway to his ear. "Why not? Dad said I could order food if I didn't like what you made." "If you want to order food, you can use your own allowance," she said. Her voice remained soft, entirely devoid of anger, which seemed to disorient him more than if she had screamed. "I am cooking cabbage soup." "I don't have enough on my debit card," Leo said, his voice rising again. "I bought those soccer socks last week. Come on, Mom, just let me use the joint card. It's just $20. "No, Leo," she said. She sliced a potato in half. The sharp tack of the knife against the heavy plastic cutting board sounded like a small, final gavel. Leo stared at her. For 15 years, his mother had been the person who accommodated every whim, who cooked 3 different meals if everyone wanted something different, who drove across town to find the specific brand of organic granola he liked, and who apologized when she was too tired to fold his laundry on the same day it was washed. He didn't know what to do with this quiet, unyielding wall. "You're being weird today," he muttered. He grabbed his backpack from the floor, zipping it with a harsh plastic rip. "I'm going to my room. Don't call me for dinner." "All right," Hannah said. She did not follow him. She did not call out after him, nor did she offer to make him a sandwich instead. She simply picked up another potato and began to peel. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen smelled of boiled potatoes, caraway seeds, and sweet stewed cabbage. It was a humble, heavy smell, the kind of food her mother used to make on rainy afternoons in Zadar, when the wind off the sea was too cold to stand. It was a smell that belonged in a small stone kitchen with a wood-burning stove, not this massive, sterile space with its $12,000 refrigerator and its silent, gleaming appliances. Hannah ladled a single portion of the thick, pale soup into a small ceramic bowl she had made herself during a pottery class years ago. She sat at the breakfast nook, her grandmother's rough brown sweater draped over her shoulders to keep out the chill of the drafty bay window. She ate slowly, listening to the rain start again outside, a soft, steady patter against the double-paned glass. The house was completely dark, except for the light over the stove. She didn't turn on the lamps. She let the gray evening fill the corners of the room, watching the way the shadows slowly swallowed the white quartz island and the empty, clean bar stools. The front door opened at 8:40. Arthur's entry was less energetic tonight. There was no bright announcement of his arrival, no quick footsteps. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, and then came the metallic clack of his keys hitting the white quartz island. He had ignored the key cabinet tonight, dropping them on the stone with a deliberate, heavy hand, as if to reassert his territory. "Hannah?" He turned on the kitchen lights. The bright, sterile glow illuminated the spotless counters, the cold stove, and the small stainless steel pot sitting alone on the back burner. Hannah was sitting in the adjacent dining room. She was at the dark walnut table, sitting next to Leo's abandoned chemistry board. In the dim light from the hallway, she was folding a small stack of white linen napkins. She did not stand up when he called. She kept her fingers flat against the fabric, pressing her thumb along the hem to form a sharp, clean crease. Arthur walked into the kitchen. He took off his suit jacket and slung it over the back of the white bar stool, the one that still bore the faint, warped circle from his wet coat the night before. He didn't seem to notice the stain this time. His focus was entirely on his stomach. He walked over to the stove and lifted the lid of the small pot. The light from the range hood caught the surface of the cabbage soup. It had cooled completely, a thin, translucent film of fat forming over the pale potatoes and wilted green ribbons of cabbage. It looked gray and humble, entirely out of place in the high-end kitchen. Arthur stared at it for 3 seconds. He let the lid drop back onto the pot with a sharp, metallic clang. "What is this?" he asked, walking to the archway of the dining room. He stood there, his tie loosened, his hands in his trouser pockets. "Cabbage soup," Hannah said. Her voice was quiet, steady, matching the rhythm of her hands as she picked up another napkin. "Cabbage?" Arthur rubbed the bridge of his nose, his voice tight with an irritation he was trying to keep under a professional veneer. "Hannah, it's nearly 9 o'clock. I've been on back-to-back calls with the East Coast and Tokyo since 3. I haven't had a real meal since noon. I thought you were making the rosemary chicken tonight." "I didn't go to the butcher today," she said. "Why not?" He stepped into the dining room. His eyes fell on the trifold cardboard display on the table. "Actually, while we're on the subject, what happened with Leo today? He texted me during my lunch break. He was practically in tears. He said you refused to drive his chemistry project to school." Hannah folded the napkin in half. He forgot it. He's 15, Hannah. He has a massive load this semester, with the AP prep and the soccer playoffs. Of course he forgot it. He's a kid. Arthur stepped closer, his voice rising, though he kept his tone low, his corporate disciplinary register fully active. We are a team, Hannah. That is how this house works. I am out there 12 hours a day, bringing in the revenue that pays for that academy. And your responsibility is to manage the logistics here. If you can't even take 20 minutes to save our son from a 0 on his final grade, I don't know what you're doing with your day. Scrape. Hannah pressed the edge of her thumbnail against the linen. The sound of the dry fabric resisting her hand was the only noise in the room. Leo is 15, she said again, her voice dropping into a register so cool and devoid of emotion that Arthur stopped. He has eyes. He has a brain. He saw the board on the table this morning. He chose to leave it. If he gets a 0, he will remember next time. Arthur stared at her. He looked at the neat stack of folded napkins, then at her face. For 12 years, Hannah had been the cushion that softened every blow for him and Leo. If Arthur forgot his wallet, she drove it to his office. If Leo lost his cleats, she searched the house until midnight. Her entire identity in this country had been built around her availability, her absolute compliance with their convenience. This quiet, logical refusal was something he didn't know how to code. It didn't fit his spreadsheets. He took a slow breath, his shoulders dropping as he consciously forced his face to soften. He sat down at the opposite end of the dark walnut table, leaning forward, his voice shifting into the warm, patronizing tone of a concerned mentor. "Look," he said softly, "are you feeling okay, Hannah? Is this about the dinner tonight? The RSVP?" Hannah did not look up from her napkin. "I told you, sweetie, it wasn't personal," he continued, his tone dripping with a carefully calibrated, weaponized sympathy. "The regional dinner is about executive alignment. It's highly political. I was only trying to protect you from feeling out of place. But if you're having a hard time lately, if the house is too much to manage alone—" He paused, waiting for her to look at him, to validate his kindness. "I can look into the company's HR portal," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We have a great mental health benefit. I can get you a referral for a therapist. Or we can hire a cleaning service to take some of the pressure off. I want you to be happy, Hannah. But this passive-aggressive behavior, it's not healthy for you, and it's affecting Leo's academic performance." Hannah looked at him then. She looked at the small, manicured cuticles on his fingers. She looked at the expensive gold band on his left hand, the one she had saved for 6 months to buy him when he graduated from his master's program, back when they lived on lentils and boiled potatoes in that drafty basement. He honestly believed he was being a good husband. He believed he was offering her a generous, modern solution to her sudden defect. To him, her silence was not a reaction to his cruelty. It was a malfunction in his domestic machinery that required professional maintenance. She calculated the energy it would take to smash his illusions. She calculated the energy it would take to tell him that she had wired his entire future, her father's 380,000 euros, back across the Atlantic this afternoon. She chose the silence. It was much lighter. "I am fine," she said quietly, "just tired." Arthur stared at her for another second, his artificial warmth evaporating the moment he realized she wasn't going to thank him or break down. He stood up, smoothing the front of his lavender shirt. "Well," he said, his voice cold again, "tired doesn't pay the mortgage, Hannah, and it doesn't get Leo into college. I'm going to order a pizza. Don't expect me to eat that gray soup." He walked back into the kitchen, his phone already in his hand as he opened his delivery app. Hannah sat in the dark dining room. She picked up the last linen napkin, folded it into a perfect sharp square, and set it on top of the stack. At 2:30 in the morning, the house was a hollow cavern of white noise. The hum of the refrigerator had settled into its lowest, most grinding cycle, vibrating faintly against the oak floorboards. Hannah stood on the landing of the stairs. She was barefoot, her toes curling slightly against the cold wood. She had left her slippers upstairs because she wanted to feel the physical temperature of the house. The smart thermostat was still set to 62 degrees for the night, a sterile, optimal sleeping temperature that felt like the air in a dairy cooler. She walked down into the kitchen. The space smelled of cardboard, stale grease, and the artificial garlic scent of the dipping sauce Arthur had ordered with his pizza. The box sat in the middle of the Calicotta Gold Island, its top lid open, revealing 2 cold, stiff slices of pepperoni pizza and a crumpled paper napkin. Normally, Hannah would have cleaned this hours ago. She would have taken the greasy cardboard out to the recycling bin in the freezing rain, wiped the quarts with stone soap, and run the dishwasher so the morning would begin with a clean slate. Tonight, she stood and watched the box. Underneath the cardboard, a dark, translucent oil stain had already begun to seep through the paper, spreading onto the porous quartz stone. It was a greasy shadow about the size of a fist. She knew that without immediate treatment, the oil would sink deep into the stone sealant, leaving a permanent gray blemish. She did not touch it. She let the grease sink in. She walked past the island into the small, dark laundry room. She did not turn on the overhead lights. She used the screen of her laptop to guide her as she sat at her desk. She opened her personal email. A new message from Sarah, the personal banker at HSBC, was waiting for her. It had been sent at 5:15 the previous afternoon. Dear Mrs. Vukovic, this is to confirm that the international wire transfer of $392,000 has been successfully initiated from your individual savings account. The funds are currently in transit to Splitska Banka, Croatia, under the reference number HR 99201V. Please allow 2 to 3 business days for the receiving institution to credit your account. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Sincerely, Sarah Vance, Senior Wealth Advisor, Bellevue Branch. Hannah read the email twice. She did not smile. Her breathing remained slow and rhythmic, her pulse steady against the collar of her nightshirt. She opened a new tab and logged into a Croatian real estate portal. She clicked on her bookmarked listings, scrolling past the modern tourist apartments in Zadar with their cheap glass balconies, until she reached the listing for the stone house in Bibinja. The listing had been updated 2 days ago. Price reduced, €310,000. The images on the screen were low resolution, taken in the harsh glare of the Mediterranean midday. The stone walls of the house were nearly 3 feet thick, built from local limestone that had turned a pale, dusty cream over 2 centuries. There was a small walled courtyard in the front, paved with uneven cobbles, where a single ancient wild grape arbor offered deep green shade. In the background, past the dry stone wall, the Adriatic Sea was a flat, blinding sheet of blue. She clicked the button labeled Contact Agent. In the text box, she typed in Croatian. Dear Ivan, I am writing regarding the property in Bibinja, ID ZD-8820. I am prepared to make a cash offer of 300,000 euros with a 10% earnest money deposit to be wired immediately upon receipt of the draft contract. Please note that I will be purchasing this property solely in my maiden name, Hana Kos, using my Croatian passport and OIB. Please send the contract and the wire instructions to this email address. Best regards, Hana Kos. She hit send. The screen flashed. Message sent. She closed the laptop, but she did not stand up immediately. She sat in the blue twilight of the room, her hand resting on the smooth plastic of the keyboard. She was 39 years old. For 12 of those years, she had lived in Washington. She had learned to speak English with only a slight, soft rounding of her vowels. She had learned to navigate the wide, sterile aisles of the suburban supermarkets, to smile politely at the school fundraisers, and to pretend she didn't hear the small, condescending jokes Arthur's colleagues made about Eastern European efficiency when she cleaned up after their dinner parties. She had spent 12 years building a life that wasn't hers. Now she was going to dismantle it, one brick at a time, without ever raising her voice. She stood up and walked back into the kitchen. On her way to the stairs, her foot brushed against Arthur's leather briefcase, which was sitting on the floor next to the dining room table. A corner of a document was sticking out of the zippered compartment, a white sheet of heavy linen paper with the gold-embossed logo of his company. Hana knelt. She pulled the document out gently, her fingers barely touching the paper so as not to make a sound. It was the final printed itinerary for the executive partner dinner next Thursday at the Rainier Club in Seattle. She flipped to the second page. It was the seating chart and guest list. The names were printed in neat, double-spaced rows. Table 3, Ted Harris, VP, North American Operations, and Margaret Harris, Richard Vance, Senior Partner, and Eleanor Vance, Arthur Vukovich, Director Candidate, Single, Marcus Thorne, Director, Strategy, and Catherine Thorne. Hana stared at the word in the parenthesis, Single. Arthur's name was the only one on the list that had been designated that way. Below it, in the notes section, it read, No dietary restrictions / single seat required. He hadn't just RSVP'd as single because of a difficult seating chart. He had registered himself as an unattached executive, presenting an image of a clean, unencumbered corporate upward mover who was entirely free to travel, to relocate, and to entertain without the social friction of an uncultured wife with a thick accent. Hana pulled her phone from her pocket. She did not hesitate. She took a clean, high-resolution photo of both pages of the document, ensuring the gold logo and the date were clearly visible. She slid the paper back into his briefcase, aligning the corner exactly as it had been before. She stood up, walked back to the kitchen island, and looked at the greasy pizza box in the dim light. The oil stain had grown larger, a dark, permanent handprint on the white quartz. She left it there. She walked upstairs, her bare feet silent on the cold oak wood, and slipped back into the bed where Arthur was snoring softly under the heavy, expensive down comforter, completely unaware of the cold draft blowing through the room. The morning light did not soften the grease stain on the kitchen island. It made it look like a dark, bruised crater on the white quartz. Arthur came downstairs at 6:30. He was wearing a fresh, light blue shirt, his briefcase already in his hand. He was moving with the tense, tight energy of a man who had slept poorly. He walked straight to the island to grab his keys, and his eyes fell on the dark ring where the pizza box had sat all night. He stopped. He set his briefcase on a stool and touched the stone with his fingertips. "Hannah!" His voice was loud, carrying a sharp, vibrating edge of panic. He didn't wait for her to emerge from the laundry room. He stepped toward the hallway, his face flushed. "Hannah, look at this. The quartz is stained. It's completely ruined." Hannah walked slowly into the kitchen. She was carrying a stack of Leo's clean school shirts. She had folded them neatly, but she hadn't ironed them. She set them on the edge of the dining table without looking at Arthur. "I see it," she said. "You see it? Then why didn't you clean it?" Arthur's voice rose, his professional calm cracking completely. He grabbed a roll of paper towels, ripped off 3 sheets, and ran them under the tap. The designer explicitly told us that Calicut gold is highly porous. If oil sits on it for more than an hour, it sinks past the sealant. Why on earth did you leave the box there all night? He began rubbing the spot aggressively with the wet paper towel. He scrubbed until the paper began to tear, leaving small white flecks of pulp on the stone. He stopped and lifted the paper. The dark, greasy ring remained entirely unchanged. It had sunk deep into the gray and gold veining, a permanent blemish on the $12,000 stone. "It's not coming out," Arthur muttered, his voice dropping into a register of disbelief. He looked up at her, his jaw clenching. "This is going to cost hundreds of dollars to have a specialist draw out with a poultice, if it can even be fixed. You were down here, Hannah. You saw the box. It would have taken you 5 seconds to put it in the trash." Hannah stood by the dining table. She did not look at the stain, nor did she look at his angry face. She looked at the small, nicked spot on his jaw from his razor. "You ordered the pizza," she said. Her voice was remarkably quiet, completely devoid of the defensive, apologetic rush she usually offered whenever something in the house went wrong. "You left the box on the counter." "Well, yes, I left it, but you're the one who manages the kitchen," Arthur said, throwing the shredded, wet paper towels into the sink. "That's your job, Hannah. If I'm working 12 hours a day to pay for this house, the least you can do is keep it from falling apart. This silent treatment, this passive-aggressive neglect, it's childish. You're acting like a teenager." "I am not acting," she said. "I am just tired of cleaning your messes." Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. He stared at her, his eyes darting across her face as if searching for some sign of the woman who had spent the last 12 years apologizing for things she hadn't done. He found nothing. Her face was as cold and smooth as the stone before the grease had hit it. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, grabbing his briefcase from the stool. "I have a meeting with the VP at 8. We are going to have a serious talk tonight, Hannah. This This attitude is stopping today." He walked out, slamming the heavy front door behind him. The vibration rattled the silver candlesticks on the dining table. At 10:45, Hannah sat in a quiet office on the third floor of an old red brick building in downtown Seattle, far from the gleaming glass and steel high-rises where Arthur worked. The office smelled of old paper, leather-bound books, and the faint, sweet scent of cedar shavings from a pencil sharpener. Outside the window, the rain was a steady gray sheet falling onto the cobblestones of Pioneer Square. An older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat, low bun sat across from her. Her name was Claire Novak. She wore a simple charcoal wool blazer and thin, gold-rimmed reading glasses that sat low on her nose. She was a family law attorney who had spent 30 years handling high-asset divorces in King County. Claire turned a page in the folder Hannah had handed her. Her fingers made a soft, dry scratching sound against the paper. "The wire transfer is very clean," Claire said, looking over her glasses at Hannah. "Your father's estate wired the 380,000 euros directly to the escrow company for the down payment on the Bellevue home. It never touched your joint checking account." "Yes," Hannah said. "I made sure." "That was very wise," Claire said, a small professional smile touching her lips. "In Washington, because we are a community property state, any asset acquired during the marriage is presumed to be community property. However, if we can trace the source of a down payment directly to separate property, such as an inheritance, you have a strong claim for reimbursement. In a dissolution, the court will likely award you that $392,000 off the top of the home's equity before the remaining balance is split." "And the rest of the house?" Hannah asked. "The house is currently valued at approximately $1.6 million, Claire said, looking at the tax assessment printout. "With a $400,000 mortgage remaining, that leaves $1.2 million in equity. If we subtract your separate property contribution, that leaves roughly $800,000 in community equity. Your half of that would be $400,000. Claire leaned back in her leather chair, tapping her pen against her chin. "So, in total, your share of the real estate equity alone would be approximately $792,000. Hannah nodded. The numbers felt abstract, like figures in a book, but she knew they represented her freedom. "And his income?" Hannah asked. "As a senior manager on the director track, his base salary, bonuses, and stock options are community property," Claire said. "We will request a full financial disclosure, including his corporate stock portfolio. But Hannah, there is something else we need to discuss." Claire pulled out the photograph Hannah had printed of the executive dinner itinerary. She laid it on the desk between them, her finger pointing to the word, printed in parenthetical, clean font, "Single." "He has registered himself as single for his corporate events," Claire said. "Under the law, this doesn't change the nature of his income, but in a courtroom, this speaks to his character and his intent. It shows a deliberate attempt to minimize your presence in his professional life, to treat the marriage as non-existent when it suits his career. It will make a judge very sympathetic to your petition." Hannah looked at the word single. It didn't hurt her anymore. It felt like a tool, a sharp piece of metal she could use to pry herself loose from the floor.
"How long does it take?" Hannah asked.
Once we file the petition, there is a mandatory 90-day waiting period in Washington before the divorce can be finalized, Claire said. During that time, we will negotiate the division of assets. If he is as concerned with his corporate image as this itinerary suggests, he will want to settle quickly and quietly. He won't want his partners to see a messy public trial where his personal finances and his corporate staging are laid bare. I don't want a trial, Hannah said. I want to go home. To Croatia? Yes. Claire looked at her for a long moment, her eyes softening behind her gold glasses. We can manage that, Hannah, but we must be very careful. We don't file the petition until the earnest money contract for your house in Zadar is signed and your inheritance funds are safely cleared in your Croatian account. We don't want him attempting to freeze those assets before they are out of his reach. Hannah stood up, picking up her heavy canvas tote bag. The wire should clear by tomorrow afternoon. Good, Claire said, standing to shake her hand. Call me the moment you see the balance in your split account. Then we will draft the petition. Hannah walked out of the office into the cool, gray Seattle afternoon. The rain felt clean against her face, washed free of the dry, sterile warmth of the Bellevue house. The windshield wipers of the Volvo made a rhythmic, heavy thump, shuck, as Hannah pulled into the driveway. The rain had settled into a dense, vertical downpour, turning the black basalt stones along the flower beds into glossy charcoal teeth. She parked in the double garage. The space was empty. Arthur's Audi was not there, and Leo was still at his after-school soccer conditioning until 6. Hannah stepped into the house through the mudroom. The air inside felt warm and perfectly still, but as she walked into the kitchen, she smelled the faint, sour residue of Arthur's pepperoni pizza from the night before. On the white quartz island, the gray grease ring was still visible under the bright recessed lights, a dark shadow that had now officially bound itself to the stone. She set her canvas tote bag on the dining table. She did not hang up her coat immediately. She sat down, pulled her laptop from her bag, and opened her personal email. 2 new messages were waiting. The first was from Splitska Banka's automated notification system. She clicked her small physical security token, the black plastic rectangle she had kept tucked under her winter socks in her drawer, and entered the 6-digit code. The screen refreshed. Stanje računa, account balance, 361,420 euros and 50 cents. The wire transfer from Seattle had cleared. The International Wealth Division had processed the $392,000, converted it, and deposited it into her private Croatian savings account. The money that had originated from her father's orchard was no longer in the American banking system. It was sitting in a stone-walled branch near the harbor in Split, safely under her maiden name. Hannah took a slow, deep breath. The air in her lungs felt lighter, as if the central heating of the Bellevue house had suddenly stopped drying out her throat. She clicked on the second email. It was from Ivan, the real estate agent in Zadar. Dear Hannah, I have excellent news. The seller, Shimon Celic, has accepted your counteroffer of 305,000 euros. He is currently finalizing his relocation to Munich and is very keen on a quick, hassle-free cash transaction. I have attached the preliminary purchase agreement, Predugovor o kupoprodaji. Please review the terms. If everything is in order, you can print, sign, and return a scanned copy with your passport. Once we receive the signed agreement and the 10% earnest money deposit, 30,500 euros, in our agency escrow, the property will be legally reserved in your name. Congratulations, Hannah. It is a beautiful house. Best regards, Ivan Babic, Zadar, Adriatic Properties. Hannah downloaded the PDF. The legal Croatian terms were clear, written in the old formal style she had grown up with. Kupac, buyer, Hannah Kos. Prodavatelj, seller, Šimun Čelić. Predmet kupoprodaje, subject of sale, stone residential building and olive orchard, Bibinje, cadastral plot 1104/2. She walked down the hallway to the small pantry closet where the family's wireless printer sat. She pressed the power button. The machine whined, its internal gears clicking into place, before it began spitting out the 5 pages of the contract, the fresh ink smelling faintly hot and chemical. She took the pages back to the dining table. She grabbed a simple blue ballpoint pen from the kitchen drawer. She did not hesitate. On the final page, in the designated space under Kupac, she signed her name, Hannah Kos. The signature was small, sharp, and neat. It was the way she had signed her name when she was 20, before she had added the hyphen and the long, heavy Vukovic that Arthur had insisted made her look more integrated on their mortgage applications. She used her phone to scan the signed pages, converting them back into a single PDF, and attached them to an email to Ivan. Then she logged back into her Splitska Banka portal, initiated a wire transfer of 30,500 euros to the agency's escrow account, and clicked Potvrdi, confirm. The transaction was complete. The earnest money was gone. The stone house near the sea was legally hers. Her phone buzzed on the walnut table. The screen lit up with a text message from Arthur. Arthur, hey, sorry about this morning. I was totally out of line about the counter. I'm just really stressed about this Ted Harris alignment meeting. Let's do takeout tonight. Sushi or that Thai place by the park? Let me know. I'll order it on my way home around 7. Hannah looked at the text. She knew this pattern. She had lived it for a decade. Whenever Arthur pushed too hard, whenever his condescension cracked her quiet exterior, and he sensed a shift in her availability, he would pivot. He would apologize, not for his cruelty, but for his stress. He would offer a small commercial peace offering, a dinner, a spa certificate, a new coat, to restore the balance of his comfortable, serviced life. He wanted her to agree, to pick a restaurant, to say, "It's okay, honey, I know you're under pressure." He wanted the domestic machinery to resume its silent, frictionless hum. She held the phone, her thumb hovering over the glass. She typed, "Hannah, the cabbage soup is in the fridge. I am going to bed early." She sent the message. Within 5 seconds, the typing bubbles appeared. Arthur, cabbage soup? Hannah, come on. I apologized. I'm trying to make it up to you. Let's just get a nice dinner and talk. She locked the phone and slid it into her drawer. She did not reply. She walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a small glass jar of green olives she had preserved herself, and took a single small olive.
She bit into it, the salt sharp and bitter against her tongue. The rain continued to beat against the kitchen window, but inside the house the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of a woman who was being ignored. It was the silence of a traveler who had already checked her bags and was simply waiting for her gate to open. The guest bedroom was situated at the end of the long, carpeted hallway, far from the master suite's vaulted ceilings and automated blackout blinds.
It was a small, square room that smelled faintly of cardboard and mattress plastic, having served mostly as a storage space for extra linens before the renovations were completed. Hannah sat on the edge of the twin bed, her back straight, her hands resting on a vintage leather portfolio that had belonged to her father. Inside the worn brown leather were her most essential documents: her Croatian birth certificate, her original passport, and her degree in economics from the University of Split. She remembered the day she had graduated. Her father had bought her a small bouquet of wild rosemary and lavender, and they had eaten grilled sardines at a tavern by the fish market. When she arrived in America, she had hoped to find a quiet accounting job, but the local credential evaluation services had deemed her university substandard. Arthur had agreed with them. "It's a different system here, sweetie," he had said, his voice gentle as he took the heavy, gold-embossed diploma from her hands and placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk. "The corporate world here doesn't really know what to do with a degree from Split. It's fine, though. I make more than enough for both of us. You don't need to put yourself through that stress." He had made her feel like he was saving her from a burden. It had taken her 10 years to realize he was simply ensuring she never had a floor of her own to stand on. From downstairs, the heavy thud of the garage door echoed through the house, followed by the wet, rubbery squeak of soccer cleats on the mudroom tile. Leo was home. "Mom?" Leo's voice was loud, carrying a raw, teenage irritation. "Is there seriously nothing to eat?" Hannah did not get up. She listened to the distant sound of cabinet doors opening and closing, the sharp rustle of plastic, and then Arthur's lower, more controlled baritone. "Just eat the soup, Leo, or get some cereal. I'm not ordering another delivery tonight." "It looks gross, Dad," Leo grumbled. "And there's this weird grease circle on the island. It smells like old pepperoni." "I know," Arthur said, his voice tightening. "I'm dealing with it. Just use the dining table." Hannah closed her father's leather portfolio, zipped it shut, and slid it under the twin bed, pushing it deep into the shadow behind the dust ruffle. A minute later, the heavy, deliberate steps of Arthur's leather house slippers sounded on the stairs. They walked down the carpeted hallway, pausing for a moment outside the master bedroom before continuing to the guest room door. The door opened without a knock. Arthur stood in the doorway. He had taken off his tie and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing his fitness tracker watch. He was holding a single sheet of printed paper and a black pen. "Hannah?" He looked around the small, sparsely decorated room, his forehead creasing with a deep administrative disapproval. "Why are you in here? The master bedroom is perfectly dark." "I have a headache," she said. She didn't lie down. She remained sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "The light in the other room is too bright." "Well, you should have turned the dimmers down," he said, stepping into the room. He did not ask if she needed water or aspirin. He held out the paper. "I need you to sign this. It's the residency affidavit for Leo's Stanford Summer Academy. The deadline is tomorrow morning at 9, and it has to be scanned and uploaded. Hannah looked at the paper. It was a formal legal document verifying that Leo Vukovich was a permanent resident of the state of Washington, residing at their Bellevue address. The program was scheduled to begin on July 10th. By July 10th, she would be 3,000 miles away. The Bellevue house would likely be listed for sale, and the joint accounts would be frozen by the court. "I'll look at it tomorrow," she said quietly.
"Tomorrow is too late, Hannah," Arthur said, his voice rising into that sharp, controlled hiss he used when his junior analyst missed a spreadsheet deadline. "I've told you this 3 times. The system locks at 9. If this isn't uploaded, his spot goes to the wait list. I spent 3 months networking with the admissions director to get him in. Why are you being so difficult about a simple signature?" He dropped the paper onto her lap, then tapped the black pen against the top of the wooden dresser. "Just sign it now," he said. "It takes 5 seconds." Hannah looked down at the document. She felt the heavy, quiet beat of her heart. She could refuse. She could let him sweat, let him scramble, let him miss the deadline. But her lawyer, Claire Novak, had been very clear. "Maintain the routine, Hannah. Do not give him any reason to suspect a sudden change in your plans. Act as if you are fully committed to the summer, to the fall, to the next 10 years. The more comfortable he is, the less he will look at the bank statements." She picked up the pen from her lap. She flattened the paper against a book on the nightstand. She wrote her signature. She signed Hannah Vukovich in the formal, looping hand she had practiced until it looked natural. She did not rush. She made sure the ink was clean and the lines were crisp. She handed the paper and the pen back to him. Arthur took them. He looked down at the signature, his eyes scanning the ink for a second. His shoulder blades relaxed slightly, the rigid, defensive posture of his body softening. He was relieved. He had gotten what he wanted, and the domestic machinery had, for a brief second, clicked back into place. "Thank you," he said, his tone still stiff but less aggressive. He looked around the small guest room again, his eyes lingering on the bare white walls. "You really should sleep in our room, Hannah. It looks weird to Leo if you're sleeping down here. He's already stressed enough about his chemistry grade." "I am tired, Arthur," she said, turning her face toward the dark window. "I am going to sleep now." Arthur stood in the doorway for another moment, the paper in his hand. He seemed to want to say something else, to assert his authority, or perhaps to offer another one of his hollow, transactional apologies. But the absolute stillness of her posture offered him no leverage. "Fine," he muttered. "Have it your way." He stepped out and closed the door. The latch clicked shut with a small, sharp snap that sounded like a lock turning in a cell. Hannah sat in the dark. She did not lie down. She listened to the hum of the heater vent in the corner of the room, its dry, artificial air blowing over her face, and waited for the house downstairs to go completely silent. The garage door rumbled open at 7:15, its heavy tracks vibrating through the kitchen ceiling, and then closed with a dull, hydraulic thud. Arthur and Leo were gone. Hannah came down the stairs. The house was cold and completely silent. She walked into the kitchen. The pizza box was gone from the island. Arthur had stuffed it into the pull-out trash can beneath the sink, which was now full and smelled faintly of sourdough and cold pepperoni. On the white Calicotta gold counter, the gray grease ring was still there, looking slightly darker and more defined than it had yesterday. Right next to the stain, Arthur had left a small, thick business card with gold lettering: Bellevue Stone Restoration and Care.
On top of the card was a yellow sticky note written in his neat corporate print. Call them today. Ask for a poultice treatment. Tell them it's an emergency. A. Hannah picked up the sticky note. She crumpled it slowly in her palm, feeling the dry paper resist her fingers, and dropped it into the trash can on top of the greasy pizza box. She left the business card exactly where it was. She walked down the hallway to the laundry room, sat at her small desk, and opened her laptop. Her fingers were cool against the plastic keys as she logged into the joint bank portal. The main screen showed their active accounts: Vukovich Joint Checking, Vukovich Investment Portfolio, and Vukovich Joint HELOC, XXXX-8920. She clicked on the HELOC tab. The available credit was listed in green numbers, $200,000. Because she was a co-signer on the property, her name was on the line of credit as an equal borrower. She had the legal authority to draw funds from the line at any time, a feature Arthur had insisted on when they first opened it. If there's an emergency with the house while I'm traveling for work, Hannah, you need to be able to move the money instantly, he had told her. Hannah clicked Transfer Funds. From Vukovich Joint HELOC to Hannah Koze, HSBC Personal Savings. Amount $150,000. Description: home improvement, kitchen/patio. She looked at the screen. She calculated the mechanics of the transfer. Under Washington community property laws, a debt incurred during the marriage is a joint liability. By drawing $150,000 from the equity of this house, she was extracting her share of the home's value in cash. When the divorce petition was served and the assets were divided, this joint debt would have to be settled from the sale of the house. The cash, however, would already be under her sole control, safely out of Arthur's reach. She clicked the button labeled Submit. The screen went white for a fraction of a second, a small gray circle spinning in the center. Transfer pending. Your funds will be available in your destination account within 24 hours. Hannah watched the screen. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. It remained dark. There was no vibration, no sound. The adjustments she had made to the alert settings 2 days ago had held. The bank had sent the transfer confirmation to her private email, and no automated text had gone to Arthur's phone. Her laptop gave a soft, high-pitched chime. It was an incoming video call on her private messaging application. The name on the screen was Ivan Zadar. Hannah connected the call. Ivan's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his office in Zadar, the bright Mediterranean sun streaming through the window behind him, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Through the open window, Hannah could hear the faint, distant sound of a scooter engine on the cobblestones. "Hannah, dobar dan," Ivan said, his voice carrying the warm, rolling cadence of the coast. "I have the confirmation from our escrow. The 30,500 euros has cleared." Hannah felt a small, tight knot in her chest loosen. "And the contract?" "Shimun has signed," Ivan said, holding up a copy of the agreement with a flourish. "We registered the pre-contract with the municipal court in Zadar this morning. You are officially the registered prospective owner, Hannah. The property is off the market." Hannah looked at the digital copy of the contract on her screen. Her maiden name, Hannah Koss, was written in bold, clean letters at the top of the page. The seller is very pleased, Ivan continued. He's already begun packing his things for Munich. We have until the 15th of next month to complete the final transaction. The remaining balance is 274,500 euros. Will you be wiring it from the same account? Yes, Hannah said. The funds are ready. I will initiate the final wire on Monday morning. Excellent, Ivan said. I will schedule the notary for Wednesday. Once the wire clears, we will sign the final deed, and I will collect the keys for you. Hannah, the garden is very beautiful right now. The wild rosemary is in bloom. It smells like home. Thank you, Ivan, she said, her voice dropping into a soft, quiet register. I will speak to you on Monday. She disconnected the call. She sat in the laundry room, the silence of the Bellevue house settling over her like a heavy wool blanket. Through the small window above her desk, she could see the dark green branches of the neighboring pine trees, still wet from the morning rain, dripping slowly onto the manicured lawn. She looked at the laptop screen. Her HSBC personal account showed the pending deposit of $150,000. By Monday, that money would be converted to euros and sitting in her split account alongside the remains of her inheritance. She had enough to pay for the Zadar house in full, with nearly 80,000 euros left over as a cushion. She closed the laptop. She walked back into the kitchen, picked up her tea mug from the breakfast nook, and set it in the sink. She looked at the business card for the Stone Restoration Company still sitting on the counter. She did not pick it up. She left it in the light, right next to the dark, greasy circle that was now a permanent part of the house. The rain had stopped by 5 o'clock, but the Washington sky remained a low, uniform ceiling of wet wool. Outside, the pine trees stood dark and motionless, their branches dripping heavy, slow drops of water onto the sodden grass of the front lawn. Hannah was in the living room, folding a small basket of Leo's clean gym socks. She worked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, smoothing the white cotton fabric with her palm before rolling each pair into a neat, compact sphere. The heavy metallic rumble of the garage door signaled Arthur's return. Hannah did not look up. She kept her fingers flat against the sock she was holding, listening to the sequence of sounds that had defined her evenings for a decade. The car engine turning off, the beep of the electronic lock, the heavy click of the fire door, and the light, rubbery squeak of Arthur's corporate loafers on the hardwood. He walked straight into the kitchen. His footsteps stopped. There was a long, heavy pause. Hannah heard the dry rustle of paper as he picked up the business card she had left on the island. Hannah. His voice was tight, carrying the sharp, defensive pitch of a man who had already anticipated a confrontation. He walked to the archway of the living room, still holding his leather briefcase in one hand and the gold-embossed stone restoration card in the other. "Did the Bellevue Stone people come?" he asked. "No," Hannah said. She did not stop folding. She rolled the sock into a ball and set it in the basket. Arthur set his briefcase down on the floor with a heavy, deliberate thud. "Why not? I left the card right on the counter. I wrote 'emergency' on the note, Hannah. The grease has been sitting on that quartz for over 36 hours now. It's going to be a permanent gray mark on our island if they don't draw it out today." "I didn't call them," she said. Arthur froze. He stared at her, his forehead creasing with a mixture of confusion and mounting anger. He stepped into the living room, his knuckles turning white around the cardboard business card. You didn't call them? Hannah, what are you doing all day? Seriously, I need an answer. First, you refused to help Leo with his school project, and now you're literally letting our kitchen ruin because you can't be bothered to make a 3-minute phone call. What could you possibly be doing that is more important than taking care of our home? I had other things to do, she said, her voice remaining soft, flat, and completely steady. What things? Tell me, Arthur said, his voice rising, though he kept his tone under that tight managerial control he used when his staff failed to meet a deadline. You don't have a job, Hannah. You don't have classes. Leo was at school all day. You're doing this on purpose. This is some kind of protest because I told you not to come to the partner dinner next week, isn't it? You're letting our $1 million asset go to waste because your feelings are hurt. He took a slow, deep breath, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if trying to summon the patience to deal with the difficult child. Look, he said, his voice shifting into a patronizing, gentle register. If you're upset, we can talk. But this is our net worth, Hannah. It's irresponsible to neglect the house like this. It's completely irrational. Hannah stood up from the sofa. She picked up the basket of folded socks, holding it against her hip. She looked at him, not with anger, not with the tearful, defensive explanations he was expecting, but with a cold, clear indifference that seemed to physicalize the distance between them. I will not be calling them, Arthur, she said. Arthur blinked, his mouth slightly open. What does that mean? What do you mean you won't be calling them? If you want the stone fixed, you can call them yourself, she said. The number is on the card. She walked past him, her shoulder barely brushing his sleeve as she carried the laundry basket toward the hallway. Arthur stood in the center of the living room, his face turning a dark, mottled red. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the faint, high-frequency hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He had never, in 12 years of marriage, heard her speak to him in that tone. There was no tremor in her voice, no tears, no heat, just a flat, unyielding boundary. Fine, he muttered, his voice trembling slightly with a cold, suppressed rage. I'll call them myself. But you need to figure out what you want, Hannah, because this is not a marriage. I am not going to live with someone who actively tries to ruin my life. Hannah did not turn back to look at him. Yes, she said quietly as she reached the stairs. You should call them. Behind her, she heard the sharp, dry slap of his loafers as he walked into his study and slammed the oak door shut. The vibration rattled the framed botanical prints hanging on the hallway wall. In the quiet of the guest room, Hannah sat at the small writing desk. Her phone was sitting on the mattress behind her, but she had turned the screen face down. She opened her laptop. A new notification had appeared in her private email inbox. The sender was Claire Novak. Attached, draft_of_Arthur_V_Vukovich.pdf. Hannah opened the attachment. The legal language was cold, precise, and completely clear. It outlined her petition for the dissolution of the marriage, the full tracing of her $392,000 separate property inheritance contribution, and her claim to half of the remaining community equity in the Bellevue home. On the final page, there was an order for immediate temporary financial restraint, a standard motion that would freeze all joint credit lines, bank accounts, and joint assets the moment the petition was officially served to Arthur. Hannah printed the document on the wireless printer in the pantry, the machine whirring quietly in the dark cupboard. She took the fresh, warm pages back to the guest room, slid them into her father's vintage leather portfolio, and pushed the folder back under the bed, deep into the shadow behind the dust ruffle. The silent preparation was complete. Every financial anchor was set, and every legal document was drafted, waiting only for her signal. She sat on the edge of the twin bed, listening to the silence of the house. From downstairs, she could hear the muffled, rapid click of Arthur's keyboard in his study as he worked on his executive slide decks, completely unaware of the cold, legal ice that was already beginning to form beneath his feet. The text message had arrived at 3:15, while Hannah was in the laundry room cleaning the lint trap of the dryer. Arthur, Richard Vance is coming by the house at 4:30. He's in Bellevue for a private client meeting and wanted to see the patio layout before we finalize the Q3 strategy lunch. Please make sure the main floor is clear. And Hannah, since you've been having those headaches, you don't need to stress yourself. I told him you've been suffering from severe migraines. Just rest upstairs in the guest room. I will handle the drinks. No need to come down. Hannah looked at the screen. The glass of her phone was cold against her thumb. She did not reply. She walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. The basalt stones were still dark from the morning damp, and the air had the flat, silent quality that always preceded a Bellevue twilight. She went upstairs to the guest room. She did not change out of her simple gray linen trousers or her grandmother's rough wool sweater. She sat on the edge of the twin bed in the dark, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. At 4:28, the sound of a heavy, quiet car engine drifted through the window. 2 doors closed with the distinct, solid thump of high-end German engineering. A moment later, the front door opened. "Come in, Richard. Watch the step there." Arthur's voice was warm, carrying a high, eager resonance that Hannah only heard when he was speaking to someone who held power over his career. It was his executive voice, polished, deferential, and entirely manufactured. "The foyer is custom white oak. We wanted something that felt organic but structured." "It's a beautiful layout, Arthur, really beautiful," a deeper, older voice replied. It was Richard Vance, the senior partner whose approval Arthur needed to secure the director role. "The scale is perfect. My wife Eleanor was just saying we need to look into a similar cedar paneling for our Bainbridge place." "Thank you," Arthur said, his slippers clicking lightly on the oak floorboards as he led Vance toward the kitchen. The architect was very particular about the light flow. "Come look at the kitchen. We went with an open-concept calicotta gold island." Hannah stood up. She walked silently to the door of the guest room, opened it an inch, and stepped out onto the carpeted landing. The landing was shrouded in deep shadow, shielded from the bright kitchen below by the thick cedar banister. She stood perfectly still, her hand resting on the smooth wood of the railing. From her vantage point, she could look down into the kitchen. The bright overhead lights were on, casting a harsh, clinical glare over the white quartz island. Arthur was standing near the sink, his lavender shirt sleeves rolled up, his watch glinting. Richard Vance, a tall man in his late 50s with thick gray hair and a bespoke navy cashmere overcoat, stood at the far end of the island. Vance's eyes fell on the dark gray circle in the middle of the quartz. "Ah," Vance said, pointing to the stain with his thumb. "A little blemish on the stone?" "Yes," Arthur said immediately, his voice smooth and untroubled. He chuckled, a soft, self-deprecating sound. "Our cleaning lady had a bit of an accident with some olive oil yesterday. We have a stone restoration specialist coming on Monday morning to lift it with a poultice. But the stone itself is beautiful." Hannah felt the words land in the silence of her chest. Our cleaning lady. It was a small, effortless lie. He couldn't admit to his boss that he had left a greasy pepperoni pizza box on his own expensive counter like an irresponsible teenager. It was much easier, much cleaner, to blame the invisible help. "Well, the help is always a gamble," Vance said, waving his hand dismissively. He looked around the empty, silent space. "Where's Hannah today? I wanted to say hello. Eleanor mentioned she was very sweet when they spoke at the summer mixer last year." Arthur's face did not twitch. He reached for a crystal decanter of scotch he had set out on the counter. "Oh, she's upstairs, unfortunately," Arthur said, his tone dropping into a warm, paternalistic register of concern. "She's had these terrible migraines lately. The light in the house has been too much for her, poor thing. She's very traditional, you know. She gets easily overwhelmed by the pace of the city and the corporate events. I told her to just stay in bed and rest. She's much happier tucked away where it's quiet." "Ah, of course," Vance said, his voice dripping with polite, superficial sympathy. "Migraines are awful. My daughter gets them. Best to keep her in the dark. It's good of you to look after her, Arthur. A stable home life is so critical for the executive level. We need men who have their domestic affairs in perfect order." "Absolutely," Arthur said, pouring 2 fingers of scotch into a heavy crystal glass and handing it to Vance. "We treat the home like a partnership. Hannah manages her domain, and I manage mine. It keeps the friction to a minimum. Let's step out to the patio. I want to show you the view of the valley before the sun goes down completely." "Lead the way," Vance said. The heavy glass door to the patio slid open with a soft, airtight hiss, then clicked shut behind them, muffling their voices into a distant, watery murmur. Hannah stood on the dark landing. Her fingers did not tighten on the cedar railing. Her breathing remained slow, even, and completely quiet. She felt an immense, freezing clarity settle over her. He had not just excluded her from his dinner. He had rewritten her entire existence. To his peers, she was no longer the wife who had paid for his degrees with her blistered hands, the woman who had built the very foundation of his success. She was a delicate, simple-minded burden, a traditional immigrant woman who got overwhelmed by the world, a fragile ornament he kept tucked away in a dark room so she wouldn't embarrass him with her accent and her lack of corporate polish. She was the cleaning lady who made the messes, and he was the benevolent master who tolerated her defects to maintain his domestic order. Hannah turned back toward the guest room. She did not feel anger. She felt the absolute mathematical necessity of what she had to do next. The energy required to remain in this house, to continue performing the role of his invisible servant, was a resource she no longer possessed. She sat back down at the small writing desk and opened her laptop. She typed an email to Claire Novak. "Dear Claire, The funds have fully cleared in Croatia. The contract is executed. Please finalize the petition for dissolution of marriage. I want Arthur to be served on Monday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock at his corporate office in Seattle. He has a regional strategy meeting with Ted Harris and the partners at that time. Please ensure the temporary restraining order, freezing the joint accounts, and the HELOC is active the moment he is served. Thank you, Hannah Koss. She clicked send. The screen flashed once, then returned to the empty inbox. Through the thin walls of the guest room, she heard the slide of the patio door downstairs as Arthur and his guest stepped back inside, their laughter light and comfortable as they toasted to their bright, spotless future. At 5:30 on Saturday morning, the air in the garage was so cold that Hannah's breath plumed in the dim light of the overhead fluorescent bulb. The concrete floor felt like a sheet of ice through her wool socks as she stood by the tailgate of her Volvo. She had moved with absolute silence, her steps light on the stairs, avoiding the creaky third step that always groaned underfoot. Upstairs, the low, rhythmic rattle of Arthur's snoring still drifted from the master bedroom, steady and uninterrupted. Hannah pressed the rubber latch under the license plate. The Volvo's tailgate rose with a soft hydraulic hiss. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out her grandmother's rough wool sweater, her father's vintage leather portfolio, and a small wooden box containing her mother's gold filigree earrings. These were the only things she was taking. The rest, the expensive designer coats Arthur had bought her, the silk blouses, the high-end kitchen appliances, the custom furniture, would remain. They were part of the Bellevue house, and they belonged to the life she was leaving behind. She lifted the carpeted floorboard of the trunk, exposing the recessed plastic well where the spare tire and the jack were secured. She fit the canvas bag and the leather portfolio into the empty spaces around the tire. They slid in tightly, nestled against the black rubber. She laid her grandmother's brown sweater over the top, smoothing the rough wool so it wouldn't snag on the metal jack. She pressed the carpeted floorboard back down. It clicked into place, perfectly flat, looking entirely empty and clean. She closed the tailgate. The soft, heavy thud of the latch was the only sound in the garage, smelling faintly of cold gasoline, damp concrete, and the pine needles that had gathered in the driveway. By 8:15, the gray light of the weekend had filled the kitchen. Arthur came down the stairs wearing his navy silk robe. His hair was slightly messy, but his face carried a bright, buoyant expression that Hannah hadn't seen in months. He didn't look at the dark grease ring on the island as he walked past. His mind was entirely occupied by his own success. He reached for the kettle and turned on the tap. For the first time in weeks, he didn't wait for her to make his coffee. He was in too good a mood to care about the missing service. "Vance was incredibly impressed yesterday, Hannah," he said, his voice loud and resonant in the quiet room. "He loved the layout. He said the cedar paneling was magnificent. He actually called Ted Harris on his drive back to his hotel in Seattle. They want to fast-track the director track announcement. We're doing the final sign-off at the Monday 2 o'clock meeting." He took a mug from the cabinet and set it on the counter with a sharp ceramic ring. "And then Monday night, we're flying out to San Francisco for the leadership retreat," he continued, turning to look at her with a broad, confident smile. "It's a 3-day summit at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay. Just the senior partners and the incoming directors. I'll need my tailored navy suit, the white linen shirt, and the gray trousers. Can you make sure they're pressed and ready by Sunday evening? I want to pack my carry-on before I go to sleep." Hannah stood by the window, her hands tucked deep into the pockets of her gray apron. Inside the right pocket, her fingertips brushed against the dry, stiff paper of her flight itinerary. Departure, Monday, June 22nd, 11:45 a.m. Seattle-Tacoma, SEA, to Frankfurt, FRA, connecting to Split, SPU. Her flight would leave exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes before his meeting began. By the time the process server walked into his executive suite on the 45th floor of the Seattle Tower, she would be 10,000 feet over the Canadian Rockies, her phone switched to airplane mode, her seat booked under her maiden name. "Yes," Hannah said. Her voice was calm, completely level. "I will press them." "Great. You're a lifesaver," Arthur said, turning back to his coffee. He didn't look at her face to see if she was smiling. He didn't need to. Her compliance was a natural resource, as guaranteed as the electricity that ran the espresso machine. Leo stumbled into the kitchen then, his eyes small with sleep, his school uniform replaced by a gray fleece hoodie. He slumped onto one of the bar stools, ignoring the grease stain entirely. "Dad," Leo said, his voice husky, "are we still going to the REI flagship store today? The ski coach said the carbon poles sell out by July." "Absolutely, buddy," Arthur said, reaching over to pat Leo on the shoulder. "Get dressed. We'll grab some brunch downtown, get the poles, and then we'll look at the new ski shells. You're going to need a good technical jacket for the Whistler trip in January." "Awesome," Leo said. He looked toward the stove, his nose wrinkling slightly. "Is there any real breakfast, or is it just more cabbage?" "We'll get brunch downtown, Leo," Arthur said quickly, before Hannah could answer. "Your mother is still resting from her migraines anyway. Let's let her have a quiet day. We can grab those loaded waffles at the place near the marina." They were a family of two now, their conversation flowing effortlessly around her, their plans built entirely on high-end brands, private ski camps, and corporate retreats. Hannah stood by the sink, watching them. She felt no anger, no sudden rush of grief. She felt only a profound, hollow distance, as if she were looking at them through the wrong end of a telescope. "I'll call the stone restoration guys from the car," Arthur said, grabbing his keys from the counter. He checked his watch. "We need this kitchen looking right before we start planning the Q3 strategy lunch. I don't want Ted Harris seeing that grease ring." "Yes," Hannah said, "you should call them." "Come on, Leo, let's go," Arthur said, heading toward the garage. "See ya, Mom," Leo muttered, his eyes already glued to his phone as he followed his father through the mudroom. The door closed behind them. The automatic lock clicked into place with its sharp, clean clack, and a moment later the low, muffled rumble of the Audi's engine vibrated through the kitchen floor before fading away down the street. The house was empty. Hannah walked into the dining room. She picked up a small container of silver polish and a clean, dry rag. She sat at the dark walnut table next to Leo's abandoned chemistry project and began to polish a single, small silver spoon. She rubbed the silver with a slow, circular motion, watching the black tarnish slowly transfer onto the white rag, revealing the cold, bright metal beneath. The backyard was damp, the grass sinking beneath Hannah's garden clogs with a soft, watery squelch. She stood by the hydrangea bushes at the edge of the property line. The flowers were heavy with the morning rain, their pale blue heads drooping toward the dark soil. She bent down, her fingers sinking into the cold earth at the base of a bush to pull a thick, stubborn dandelion by its roots. The soil clung to her knuckles, cold and gritty. She looked up at the Bellevue house. It sat massive and white against the gray Washington sky, its large double-paned windows reflecting only the empty mist. It was a beautiful structure, but as she stood in the dirt, she realized she had never owned a single square inch of it. She had only serviced it. The sound of the garage door rumbled through the wet air, signaling Arthur's return. Hannah walked back to the mudroom. She took off her dirty clogs, leaving them by the door, and washed her hands at the small utility sink. From the kitchen, the rustle of heavy, high-end shopping bags echoed through the hallway, accompanied by the sharp, metallic tap, tap, tap of Leo's new ski poles on the white oak floor. "Careful with the floor, Leo." Arthur's voice was warm, carrying the relaxed, expansive tone of a man who had spent a successful afternoon spending money. "Don't scratch the finish before we even get to Whistler." "These are so sick, Dad," Leo said. He was standing in the middle of the living room, holding the black carbon composite poles. They were sleek, feather-light, and completely modern. He was wearing his new gray Arc'teryx ski shell, the tag still dangling from his zipper. They weigh literally nothing. Arthur walked into the kitchen carrying 2 large green bags from the REI flagship store. He dropped them onto the sofa with a soft plastic rustle. "The store was a zoo," Arthur said, reaching into the refrigerator for a bottle of sparkling water. He looked at Hannah as she walked in from the hallway, his expression pleasant, almost indulgent. "But we got the last carbon poles in his size, and the jacket fits perfectly. It's the top-tier Gore-Tex model." He took a long sip of his water, then pulled his phone from his trouser pocket. His forehead creased slightly as he stared at the screen. "Hey, Hannah," he said, his thumb flicking across the glass. "Did you do something with the joint bank portal today?" Hannah's heart did not skip a beat. She stood by the counter, her hands folded in her apron pocket. Her knuckles were still slightly dark from the garden soil. "Why?" she asked. "I tried to log into the HELOC app at the cash register to see if we should put the gear on the line of credit, but it kept saying, 'Invalid credentials,'" Arthur said. He tapped the screen with his index finger. "And then I tried to reset the password, but it said the verification code was sent to an email ending in yahoo.com. We don't even use Yahoo. I thought maybe there was some kind of glitch, or if you were transferring funds for the property tax." Hannah looked at his phone. She saw the pale blue light reflecting on his face, highlighting the small, impatient lines around his eyes. "The bank sent an email on Wednesday," she said, her voice remarkably calm, her tone entirely matter-of-fact. "They said they were updating the security protocols this weekend. The online portal and the mobile app are down for system maintenance from Saturday morning until Sunday night." Arthur stared at his phone for another second. He let out a short, dismissive sigh and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Of course," he muttered, shaking his head. "Bank IT is always 10 years behind. They probably crashed their own server trying to push a patch. I'll look at it on Monday morning. It's fine. I just used the Amex anyway. The points are better for the San Francisco trip." He did not think about it again. Why would he? To Arthur, the financial infrastructure of their life was an administrative machine that he had built and that he controlled. The idea that his wife, the quiet, traditional woman who spent her days weeding the garden and folding his shirts, could have locked him out of his own equity was an impossibility. It did not fit his conceptual universe. She was simply a user of his accounts, a dependent who handled the local expenses under his supervision. "Mom, what's for dinner?" Leo asked, walking into the kitchen. He was still wearing the expensive ski jacket, his chest puffed out slightly. "I'm starving." "There is leftover cabbage soup," Hannah said. Leo groans, slumping against the quartz island, his hand brushing right over the dark grease ring that Arthur had still not called to fix. "Again? Dad, can we please just get burgers? Cabbage soup is literally depression food." Arthur laughed, a warm, indulgent sound, as he patted Leo's back. "Tell you what, let's head down to the pub by the marina. They have those wood-fired burgers you like." He turned to Hannah, his eyes carrying a brief, patronizing flash of generosity. "Do you want to come, Hannah? You've been cooped up in the house all day. The fresh air might help with your migraines." He was offering her an invitation now, a small, transactional token of inclusion, because his own day had gone so well, and he felt secure in his dominance. "No," Hannah said. Her voice was quiet, completely soft. "I have to finish the laundry, and I must press your suit for Monday." Arthur's face instantly smoothed into a look of complete satisfaction. The domestic helper was back in her place, prioritizing his needs over her own leisure. "Right, the suit," he said, nodding. "Yes, that's more important. I need the navy one looking sharp for the 2 o'clock meeting." "Thanks, sweetie. Come on, Leo. Let's go before the dinner rush starts." "Awesome," Leo said, already ripping the tags off his new jacket and tossing them onto the white quartz counter. They walked out through the mudroom. The heavy fire door closed behind them, and a moment later the low electric rumble of the Audi's engine vibrated through the floorboards before fading away down the wet street. The house was empty again. Hannah walked over to the island. She picked up the plastic tags Leo had discarded, along with a gold-embossed business card for the Stone Restoration Company. She walked to the trash can under the sink and dropped them in, on top of the old pizza box. She went to her laundry room desk and opened her laptop. There were no alerts. The wire transfer of $150,000 had fully cleared into her Splitska Banka account. The balance was sitting there, untouched, waiting for her to authorize the final transaction on Monday morning. She closed the laptop. She walked to the master closet, reached in, and took Arthur's tailored navy suit from its custom cedar hanger. She carried the heavy wool trousers and the jacket down to the laundry room, set them next to the steam iron, and turned the dial to high. The machine began to hum, a small, high-pitched vibration that filled the quiet room, before a thick cloud of hot, moist steam rose into the air, smelling of clean wool and hot metal. The rain on Sunday morning was different from the storm of the night before. It was a silent gray mist that clung to the windows, turning the Bellevue Valley into a soft, dripping watercolor of dark pines and white rooftops. Hannah stood in the laundry room, the heavy steam iron in her right hand. She was pressing Arthur's tailored navy suit. She worked with a slow, meditative precision, using a damp white cotton cloth placed over the dark wool of the trousers so the hot metal of the iron wouldn't burn the delicate fibers or leave a shiny, cheap finish on the seams. Shh, shh. The metallic hiss of the steam button released a warm, moist cloud that smelled of clean wool, starch, and the hot, industrial scent of the heating element. It was a smell she had known for 12 years. She had ironed his shirts for his first interviews, for his promotion to manager, for his senior manager presentation, and now for his director candidacy. She smoothed the sleeve of the jacket, her fingers tracing the fine weave of the Italian wool. She knew every seam of this suit. She knew the dry cleaner's small blue plastic tag hidden inside the pocket. She knew the slightly loose button on the left cuff that she had reinforced with black silk thread last winter. Arthur walked into the laundry room. He was carrying his black leather Toomey suitcase, setting it down on the washer lid with a heavy, muffled thud. He wore his weekend clothes, a cream cashmere zip-up sweater and dark gray lounge trousers. "That crease looks exceptional, Hannah," he said, leaning his shoulder against the door frame. He checked his smartwatch, his wrist rotating with a neat mechanical click. "Thank you. Have you seen my travel wallet? The RFID blocking one? I checked the dresser drawers, but it's not there." Hannah lifted the pressing cloth, a fresh plume of steam rising between them, momentarily obscuring his face. "It is in the safe," she said. Her voice was quiet, completely level. "On the lower shelf, behind the cash envelope." "Ah, right. I forgot I put it there after the London trip," he said, shaking his head with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "My mind has been entirely on this Ted Harris alignment meeting. It's a lot of moving pieces." He did not go to the safe immediately. He stood in the doorway, watching her lift the iron and set it back on its metal stand. He looked relaxed, his posture open and comfortable, entirely secure in the quiet, predictable order of his home. "We should look at the Volvo next weekend," he said casually, crossing his arms over his chest. "The lease on the Audi is up in 6 months, but I think we should upgrade your car first. A Lexus RX maybe, in white. It's a very clean, professional look for the neighborhood and the school runs. Since we're moving into the director's circle on Monday, the Volvo looks a bit dated. It doesn't project the right image for when we host the Q3 strategy lunch." Hannah smoothed the navy trousers on the board. "The Volvo is fine," she said. "Well, it runs, but image is part of the work, Hannah," Arthur said, his tone shifting into that gentle, patronizing register he used when explaining corporate logic to her. "People in the neighborhood notice. Mrs. Gable asked me yesterday if we were going to get the driveway repaved. Once the promotion is finalized tomorrow, the cash flow will be there to handle all of it. We'll repave, we'll get the stone island fixed, and we'll get you the new car. It's an investment in our future." Hannah looked down at the dark blue wool of his trousers. "Yes," she said quietly, "an investment." "Exactly," Arthur said, smiling, entirely pleased with her soft, compliant response. "I'm going to go pack. I want to make sure I have my golf shoes in the carry-on. Ted Harris mentioned we might do 9 holes on Tuesday morning at Half Moon Bay before the strategy session." He picked up his suitcase and walked down the hallway, his slippers making a soft shuff-shuff sound on the carpet. Hannah let the iron sit on the metal stand. She stood in the quiet laundry room, her hand resting on the edge of the ironing board. She had already finalized the appointment on her phone. On Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, she would drive the Volvo to the CarMax dealership in South Bellevue. She had the title in her purse, registered solely in her maiden name. She would sign the vehicle over to them, collect the $18,500 check, deposit it into her personal HSBC account using her mobile banking application, and take an independent car service directly to SeaTac Airport. The Volvo would be gone, the cash would be in her account before her flight to Frankfurt even boarded. She picked up the navy trousers, folded them over the hanger, and draped the jacket over the top. The suit hung perfectly straight, the uniform of a director, a man of prestige, a man who believed he had his domestic affairs in absolute order. She carried the hanger upstairs and hung it on the hook of his closet door. She walked past Leo's room. His door was wide open. He was lying on his bed, his new carbon composite ski poles resting on the rug beside his desk. He had his AirPods in, his face illuminated by the bright blue-white glare of his iPad screen as he watched a soccer match. He did not look up as she passed. He was completely self-absorbed, existing in the warm, serviced cocoon she had maintained for him his entire life. Hannah stood in the hallway for a moment, watching the blue light flicker across his face. She felt a quiet, heavy sadness. But it was not the sadness of regret. It was the sadness of an old wound finally turning to scar tissue. She had tried to keep him warm, but the Bellevue house had taught him to view her as a utility, a resource that existed only to clean his clothes and grease his wheels. The division of assets in the petition draft under her bed outlined a shared custody proposal. But she knew Arthur's pride. He would keep Leo here, in his expensive schools and elite ski camps, rather than admit to his colleagues that his traditional wife had left him stranded. Leo would remain in his comfortable world until he realized what it cost to live without the hands that kept it running. Hannah walked back to the guest room, closed the door, and locked it. The click of the latch was the only sound in the quiet hallway. At 6 o'clock on Monday morning, the alarm on Arthur's side of the bed hummed. He was out of bed instantly, driven by the sharp electric anticipation of the day. Hannah remained perfectly still under the sheets of the guest room bed, listening to the familiar sounds of his morning routine. She heard the closet door slide open, the rustle of the dry cleaner plastic being torn away, and the soft, heavy sigh of the tailored navy suit jacket settling over his shoulders. By 7:15, the house was empty. Arthur and Leo had left early, their voices carrying a bright, confident chatter about the afternoon meeting and the flight to San Francisco. Hannah stood up. She walked into the master bedroom. The room was clean, the bed made with Arthur's usual geometric precision. She walked to her side of the closet. The remaining beige and gray Nordstrom knits hung in neat, silent rows, looking like the skin of a person she no longer was. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her heavy gold wedding band, the one she had saved 6 months of bakery wages to buy him 12 years ago, and walked down to the kitchen. She laid the ring in the exact center of the dark grease stain on the Calicut gold island. The polished gold band sat perfectly quiet, resting on the gray, permanent oil ring, a final ledger of his neglect. She picked up her canvas tote bag, walked out to the garage, and started the Volvo. At 9:15, the air inside the CarMax office in South Bellevue smelled of commercial carpet cleaner and stale coffee. A young associate in a blue polo shirt handed Hannah a green paper folder and a cashier's check. "Everything looks perfect, Mrs. Cos," he said, using the maiden name written on her title document. "The wire transfer for the $18,500 has been initiated to your HSBC account. The Volvo is officially ours. Do you need us to call you a ride?" "No," Hannah said, sliding the check into her bag. "I have a car waiting." She walked out of the dealership, her fingers steady as she opened her mobile banking application. With 2 taps, she scanned the check, watched the screen flash green to confirm the deposit, and stepped into the black sedan she had ordered. "SeaTac Airport," she told the driver. "International departures." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the executive boardroom on the 45th floor of the Seattle Glass Tower was filled with the quiet, expensive murmur of 5 men. Arthur sat at the long mahogany table, his tailored navy suit jacket fitting him perfectly, his posture upright and confident. To his left sat Ted Harris, the regional VP, and to his right sat Richard Vance. A large silver pitcher of ice water sat in the center of the table, sweat dripping slowly down its polished side. "All right, gentlemen," Ted Harris said, opening his leather portfolio. "Before we review the Q3 expansion slides, we have an administrative announcement to make regarding the West Coast director vacancy." Arthur felt his throat tighten with a quiet, triumphant heat. He smiled, his eyes drifting to the window, where the Seattle Bay was a gray, flat mirror. A quiet knock sounded on the glass door. Arthur's assistant, a young woman with a harried expression, opened the door an inch. "Excuse me, Ted, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there is a gentleman here who insists he has an urgent court-ordered delivery for Arthur. He said it cannot wait." Arthur's brow furrowed. He felt a small, cold spike of irritation. "Tell him to leave it at the front desk, Sarah. We're in the middle of an alignment sync." "I tried," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously to Richard Vance. "But he said if I don't let him in, he will involve building security." A man in a plain gray suit stepped past her into the boardroom. He carried a thick pink envelope. He walked straight to Arthur's end of the table. "Arthur Vukovich?" the man asked. "Yes," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a tight, defensive register. "What is this?" "You've been served," the man said, setting the pink envelope flat on the mahogany table, right in front of Arthur's water glass. "Petition for dissolution of marriage and a temporary restraining order. Have a good day, sir." The man turned and walked out, the glass door clicking shut with a soft administrative snap. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Arthur stared at the pink envelope. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore open the seal, pulling out the 40 pages of crisp white paper. His eyes fell on the bold legal text. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Hannah Kos. Below it, in the temporary restraining order section, the text was underlined in black. All joint credit lines, bank accounts, and joint assets of the marital community are hereby frozen, effective immediately. The petitioner claims a separate property reimbursement of $392,000 from the equity of the residence at 1104 Ridgeview Lane. Arthur's face drained of color. His breath caught in his chest. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb sliding frantically across the screen. He opened his banking app. The screen flashed red. Account suspended. Contact administrator. He checked the HELOC portal. The balance was no longer $200,000. It showed a draw of $150,000 executed 48 hours ago, with the remaining $50,000 locked under court order. "Arthur?" Richard Vance's voice was cold, stripped of all warmth. He leaned forward, his gray eyes scanning the papers in Arthur's hands. "Is there a problem?" Arthur looked up. He looked at Ted Harris, then at Vance. The beautifully pressed navy suit suddenly felt tight, suffocating, like a band of steel wrapping around his ribs. The carefully constructed narrative of his perfect, stable domestic life had just been laid bare, shredded in front of the very men who held his entire career in their hands. I have a minor family matter," Arthur stammered, his voice thin and hollow. "It doesn't look minor, Arthur," Ted Harris said, closing his leather folder with a heavy, final click. "We value stability at the executive level. Perhaps we should table this announcement until your domestic affairs are in order." 8,000 miles away, the sun was setting over the Adriatic Sea. Hannah sat on the stone terrace of the house in Bibigna. The air was warm and salt-crusted, carrying the deep, sweet scent of wild rosemary and olive wood smoke. Below the dry stone wall of her courtyard, the water was a vast, peaceful sheet of deep indigo, turning to gold where the sun touched the horizon. She was wearing her grandmother's rough wool sweater, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hands were dirty, her fingernails dark with the rich red soil of her own small olive grove. A small plate of fresh figs and local goat cheese sat on the wooden table beside her, next to a glass of simple red wine. Hannah took a slow sip of the wine. She looked out at the sea. There was no hum of a sub-zero refrigerator. There was no ticking of a Bellevue clock, no clinical light, no demands for her invisible labor. There was only the gentle, rhythmic lap of the tide against the ancient stone wall and the clean, silent wind blowing off the water. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She felt the warmth of the stone terrace beneath her feet, and for the first time in 12 years, she drew a breath that belonged entirely to her. If this story reminded you that family should never take love for granted, you are not alone. When we treat the people who support us as invisible resources rather than human beings, we eventually find that even the deepest wells can run completely dry. What would you have done if you were in Hannah's shoes? Would you have walked away as quietly, or would you have stayed to fight for the house in Bellevue? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy deep, meaningful stories of resilience, quiet strength, and the courage it takes to reclaim your dignity, please consider subscribing. We share new family dramas every week, exploring the complex truths that define our lives. Because in the end, a house built on another person's sacrifice will always crumble the moment they finally decide to go home.